Chapter 950. What does this mean? Zhang Hai looked at the eyes of these people in front of him. If it weren't for the fact that these people still looked like humans, he would have thought that he was in a Resident Evil world. Why do these people's eyes look so strange? Oh, I'm not sure. I'll go and ask right away. Louis Quezada also felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange, so after thinking for a while, he said something to Zhang Hai. He then nodded to Jittered Maud behind him. After Jittered Maud saw Louis Quezada nodding, she immediately took out a smartphone. However, her phone was different from ordinary smartphones. The system of this phone was the internal system of the CIA. No one could hack it. Not even Wallace Shelley. And it seemed that the technology behind it was also very strong. Basically, a mobile phone is a transparent piece of glass. It's very thin, and if it's not turned on, others can't see it. Of course, they can see it themselves. Zhang Hai has always been very interested in this kind of black technology, but for this kind of black technology, he feels that it's ordinary because he doesn't lack such black technology. Don't forget, he was a shareholder of Google, although the smart system in his house was not yet complete. But before he left, the two guys at Google also gave Zhang Hai a new bracelet that was connected to his glasses. When he wanted to make a call, he did not need to take out his phone anymore. He could directly look at it with his eyes. The bracelet would project the phone's screen, and he could directly operate it on it. It could be projected into the air, on his arm, or on the table, etc. The technology seemed to be very powerful, so he was not envious of the transparent phone. After all, we don't have much hot water here. In the kitchen over there, dinner time is at 5:30 p.m. If you have any requests, remember to tell the chef in advance. The chef will try his best to satisfy your requests, but the amount is up to them. There's a public bath here, and there's a bar over there. As long as someone is there, you can buy beer. Beer is free, but foreign wine costs money. You can't enter the research room, but the observation deck doesn't matter. Any other questions? At this time, Veston Karl led Zhang Hai and the others to a row of rooms and said to Zhang Hai. After hearing that there were no more questions, Zhang Hai and the others also got the keys to their respective rooms. After opening the door, they also walked into their rooms. But when he saw that Azalina, Wallace Shelley, and Galina Vizcaya had all moved into Zhang Hai's room, he couldn't help but twitch his mouth, then sighed helplessly, turned around, and left. It was obvious that he was not in a good mood now. What do you mean? Looking at the man who seemed to be unhappy walking away, Zhang Hai frowned and asked with some puzzlement. Ahem, we seem to have broken the rules here. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Guitard Maud's face inexplicably blushed, then he showed the information in his hand to Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. Then his expression became a little strange. Because the information written on it seemed a bit ridiculous. To be honest, Zhang Hai himself found it quite difficult to accept what was written on the information. Because the geographical conditions in Antarctica were somewhat special, this place could only be entered for 3 months in a year, and there were still 9 months where it could not be entered. Therefore, supply ships and the like would transport enough materials for these people to live for 9 months during these 3 months. Then these people from the scientific research station would be left here for 9 months. During this time, they couldn't contact their families. So naturally there was no entertainment to speak of. Because the sunlight in Antarctica was very short during winter, electricity was also available. Everyone lived together all day without electricity, there was nothing to play with, and there was almost no way to go out. Under such circumstances, the Americans, or rather the Westerners, were originally very indulgent. Just like in the ancient Xia, everyone went to bed early and there was no nightlife. Under such circumstances, there was nothing else to do except for not being able to write about it. Therefore, there was also an unwritten rule in the Antarctic Scientific Research Station, which was to make this place an independent existence from the rest of the world. Here, the way to vent was to find a partner, which was what the people here called an ice wife or an ice husband. Many of these people were married people, so they didn't care about this. Each person would use at least 120 condoms every year, not to mention when they didn't bring any. Therefore, the Antarctic Scientific Research Station would give these people an experience every year, the most important of which was to check for diseases such as AIDS. Although these scientific research stations tried to recruit people according to a 1-to-1 ratio, not many women were willing to come, so basically, the recruitment ratio was about 2-to-1. In this way, in the scientific research station, women were well-deserved queens. They had the right to choose their own partners, and the men were somewhat depressed. This time, when they saw that there were 4 beautiful women in Jiang Hai's group, the men were very excited. However, when they saw Azalina and the others living in Jiang Hai's room, they knew that they had no chance, so Dr. Carl sighed helplessly. It seems that this place is really messy. After reading the information, Jiang Hai then gave the phone to Jittered Maud and curled his lips. He knew that these guys were up to no good just now. Don't go out easily tonight. Don't cause any trouble. Tomorrow morning, we will leave after getting the supplies. Louis Quezada, who also read the information, also said at this time, then walked into his room. Jittered Maud thought for a while and followed in. Sure enough, the 2 of them were having an affair. As for Jiang Hai and the others, they also returned to their rooms. After resting in the room, Jiang Hai and the others went to the restaurant for dinner in the evening. When they were in the restaurant, naturally, many people paid attention to Jiang Hai and the others, but they were not stupid. Maybe they knew that they couldn't afford to offend these people, and they were all taken, so these people didn't come to trouble Jiang Hai and the others. They just watched from a distance. Of course, the most important reason was that these people had actually just arrived. It was summer now, so naturally, they could go back and forth through the supply ship, so they didn't need much now. After dinner, Jiang Hai and the others went back to rest. Early the next morning, Jiang Hai and the others left here. However, before they left, they naturally had to get the supplies. The CIA's work, especially with Jiang Hai's financial support, was very reliable. The scientific research station here had already prepared the things they needed. There were 6 huge snowmobiles, each of which could seat 4 people, but now only 2 people could ride each one because they still had to store supplies and so on. There were also a lot of supplies. There were windproof tents, special pots, alcohol blocks, medical kits, and things similar to heat packs. There were also military shovels, pickaxes, hammers, and so on. There were all kinds of tools, but most of them were food. In Antarctica, there was no shortage of water. The seawater couldn't freeze because only water vapor could freeze and turn into snow. So all the snow and ice in Antarctica was fresh water. This didn't matter. The main thing was food, such as special jerky, chocolate bars, compressed biscuits. Although these things tasted very bad, in Antarctica, these were all life-saving things. The last and most important thing was fuel, gasoline. Jiang Hai's snowmobiles were a mixture of gasoline and electricity. There was a solar panel on the snowmobiles. During the day, they could use the electricity to run. If there was not enough electricity, or if it was a cloudy day for a long time, or if they had to travel at night, then they could use gasoline. Because gasoline was a mixed liquid, its freezing point, which was the so-called freezing point, was different. Generally speaking, the freezing point of gasoline in China was between -35 to 45 degrees Celsius. In some extremely cold places, it could also reach 50 to 60 degrees Celsius. However, at the Antarctic Scientific Research Station, it was -60 to -70 degrees Celsius all year round, or even colder. Therefore, the freezing point of gasoline here was -80 degrees Celsius, which was also the lowest temperature. -80 degrees Celsius was enough to deal with a lot of situations. Of course, if it reached -80 degrees Celsius or above, then there was no need to go out. Not everyone would seek death at that time. For Jiang Hai, he had spent money anyway, so Jiang Hai and the others didn't stand on ceremony. After packing more than a dozen bags of supplies and more than 20 barrels of gasoline, they left the scientific research station, avoiding the reluctant gazes of these guys. After going outside, Jiang Hai and the others were naturally fully armed. Even Jiang Hai and Xiao Bai were wearing their own custom-made clothes and 2 specially made anti-snow goggles. Sitting behind Jiang Hai's snowmobile, they looked quite impressive. Then, Jiang Hai and the others drove the 6 snowmobiles and sped towards the interior of Antarctica. Although Louis Quezada had never been to Antarctica personally, he knew the route and location very well, so he just needed to follow his navigation. Although the snowmobiles couldn't be compared to real motorcycles, they were still very fast here, almost reaching a speed of about 80 kilometers per hour. However, although they weren't slow, the snowmobiles were almost silent because there were snow mountains and glaciers everywhere in Antarctica. If they weren't careful, they could cause an avalanche. Chapter 951. Let's camp here tonight. There's a plane in front of us. It looks like we won't be able to get out today. The strong wind was mixed with snowflakes, constantly blowing on Jiang Hai and the others. Louis Quezada pointed at the electronic map in his hand while speaking to Jiang Hai next to him. Jiang Hai also glanced at the endless plain in the distance and nodded gently. Then the two of them separated and jumped down from the snow slope in front of them. They entered the two small camps behind them, one on the left and one on the right. This was where they lived. There were two tents on each side, one big and one small. They looked pretty good. It was said that one should not have the intention to harm others, but one must always be vigilant against others. Although they came together, Jiang Hai and Louis Quezada still moved forward in two separate groups. They did not mix together. Every day when they set up camp, they would arrange the snowmobiles in 2 rows and place them in the middle as a cordon. Jiang Hai was on the right, and Louis Quezada was on the right. Both sides minded their own business and ate their own food. They did not trust each other, but they were together. This journey had been going on for 3 days now. Yes, it had been 3 days since Jiang Hai and the others set off from the scientific research station. During these 3 days, Jiang Hai and the others had been moving towards their goal. Because there was no place to rest, Jiang Hai and the others spent the rest of their time on the snowmobiles, except for when they set up camp. According to the calculation, they ran for 13 hours a day, 80 kilometers an hour. That was more than 1,000 kilometers a day. Of course, they were not walking in a straight line. The road to the South Pole was not completely flat. There were many snow valleys, glaciers, and snow mountains. Sometimes, Jiang Hai and the others had to jump over them. Sometimes, Jiang Hai and the others had to go around them. All of these took time. But even so, 3 days had passed, and Jiang Hai and the others had advanced about 4/5 of the way. After jumping over the plain in front of them, they should be near the mountain that was destroyed by the high-altitude landing plan. That was their goal. Walking into the tent, Jiang Hai saw that his people were also busy. Wallace Shelley was fiddling with her electronic equipment. These things were to ensure that Jiang Hai would have the ability to walk out of here if he fell out with Louis Quezada. She had to be careful. Bell Lester was wiping his gun. He had been running for the past few days, but he did not look tired. After all, he used to be from the Triangular State. Although he had never been to the South Pole, he must have undergone a lot of training. Knerson Peters was doing push-ups. To him, only by exercising his body could he protect Jiang Hai. Azalina and Galina were in front of a pot, boiling the melted snow inside. Beside them were penguins that were only left with fat and skin. Of course, there were still a lot of feathers on the skin. The feathers on the penguins were indeed feathers, not animal fur. However, these feathers were very small and looked like fine scales. The insulation effect was okay, but not very good. The biggest function of the feathers was waterproof and reduce underwater resistance. As Jiang Hai and the others went deeper and deeper into the South Pole, there was no water in the vicinity. There was ice and snow everywhere. Occasionally, there would be some water caves and the like. Under such circumstances, most creatures would find it difficult to live here. Therefore, there were many seabirds in the periphery of the South Pole, such as seagulls and other creatures, but they had completely disappeared here. In the past 3 days, Jiang Hai could count the number of seals he saw with his fingers. The only thing that was more abundant was the penguins. Jiang Hai had seen a lot of penguins, and he also knew some of the habits of these creatures. To be honest, penguins have a lot of fans both in China and abroad. However, this kind of creature is really a kind of creature. This kind of creature is very sneaky. It often steals things or attacks humans or other creatures. Moreover, although they lived together, their social relationships were very chaotic. The penguins in the South Pole were all lascivious thieves and sluts. Although they were monogamous on the surface, as long as the two were separated, they would do that kind of thing crazily. Even the seals were led astray by the penguins. Originally, the seals caught the penguins to eat, but now the seals sometimes caught the penguins to play. Needless to say, although the penguins were different species, the most important thing was to get into the penguins. Therefore, the parents of penguins took turns to incubate the eggs. When the female incubated the eggs, the male would go out to look for food, and then go crazy. Asterisk cough asterisk asterisk cough asterisk. When the male incubated the eggs, the female would go out to look for food, and then go crazy. Asterisk cough asterisk asterisk cough asterisk. This was the reality. Most penguins, while raising their own children, would also break other penguins' eggs and bite other penguins' chicks to death. These were all seen by Jiang Hai with his own eyes. Therefore, penguins were really bad creatures. Zhang Hai had also said before that this kind of creature was actually quite bad. However, once, when Zhang Hai and Xiaobai went out to play, they caught a penguin back. Zhang Hai wanted to try it out, so he cooked it and ate it. In the end, he found that if only the lean meat inside was eaten, the taste was actually not bad, but it was a little too fishy. However, this was easy to solve. Zhang Hai brought wine and ginger, which were all things to remove the fishy smell. The penguin meat cooked with these things tasted good, and it had a kind of beef and mutton taste. Of course, there was no way to eat the fat. The skin, claws, and head were all inedible. However, in this kind of weather, being able to eat a bite of fresh meat was also a good enjoyment. Zhang Hai and the others had been eating like this for 2 days. Soon, Azalina and Galina finished cooking the pot of penguin meat. After quietly throwing away the soup, they boiled a new pot of water and threw the penguin meat, dried vegetables, and other things into the pot. As the water in the pot boiled again, the smell of broth filled the tent. Smelling this smell, everyone's eyes also focused on it. As the broth was ready, Azalina also gave everyone a big bowl of broth. Little Huang and Xiaobai also had a bowl each. Then with the compressed biscuits, Zhang Hai and the others also started eating. They should be arriving soon. Azalina asked Zhang Hai while eating. Well, they should be arriving soon. Abel nodded. According to Louis Cazada, they should be arriving tomorrow. Then we have to be careful. Galina also looked at Azalina and said after hearing what Zhang Hai said, "Don't worry, they won't have the guts to touch us before they find out anything." Hearing what she said, Zhang Hai also smiled and said, he was telling the truth. For a privileged person like him, there was really nothing to be afraid of. There's no harm in being careful, boss. At this time, Bell smiled at the side. He still supported Galina's statement. Well, there's no harm in being careful. Hearing Bell's words, Zhang Hai nodded. There's no harm in being careful. Soon, everyone finished the food in front of them, and then Bell and Knerson Peters returned to their tent. Little Huang and Xiaobai also ran outside the tent sensibly. They will be on guard nearby and will come back to sleep during the day tomorrow. Compared to being on guard, they are actually more dutiful. Then, only Zhang Hai and the other 3 were left in the tent. Of course, this is the Great South Pole. Zhang Hai is not crazy enough to make children in the tent, but rubbing and hugging are inevitable, and they are more used to this. After changing his clothes, Zhang Hai hugged the 3 girls and fell asleep. The night passed without any words. The next morning, Azalina heated a pot of water again. After everyone washed up, they looked at the direction of the wind. After all, it was summer. Although the wind was about level 7, they could still walk. After putting on their equipment and packing their things, Zhang Hai and the others rode their snowmobiles, jumped over the snowy peak in front of them, and headed towards the plains in front of them. Along the way, everyone's speed was not slow, and they soon rushed to the plains. However, as the old saying goes, looking at a mountain is close enough to kill a horse. Nothing can be done based on the scenery on the plains. Therefore, even though the mountain did not seem far away, Zhang Hai and the others ran from dawn to dusk before they arrived at this place. After arriving here, both Louis Cazada and Zhang Hai breathed a sigh of relief. For the whole day, they did not rest except for a short break when they had lunch. They kept running and finally arrived. After arriving at the snowy peak, Louis Cazada looked at Zhang Hai and said in a low voice, "According to the information on the map, the entrance to the underground city is halfway up the mountain. Are we going tonight or tomorrow? If I say that we'll go tomorrow, will you believe me?" Glancing at Louis Cazada, Zhang Hai smiled and said, to be honest, since they were already here, it was impossible for Zhang Hai not to want to go directly. "Oh, I don't really believe you. Then let's spend the night in the cave at the entrance." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Louis Cazada also laughed. As he said, he did not believe that Zhang Hai would not sneak up. In this case, instead of following Zhang Hai after knowing that he had sneaked out, it was better to go in together. He was really curious. What did Zhang Hai want to do? Then let's go. Since it had been decided, Zhang Hai did not say much. With a wave of his hand, the people around him started the snowmobiles one by one and rode towards the direction of the mountain. Although the speed of climbing up the mountain was much slower, it was fortunate that the mountain was very short. It was only about 3,000 meters, and the position halfway up the mountain was more than 1,000 meters. Although the higher they went, the stronger the wind and the colder it became, everyone could still barely hold on. Finally, before the sky was completely dark, Zhang Hai and the others arrived halfway up the mountain. At this moment, what entered their eyes was a huge cave. Chapter 952. Looking at the huge cave in front of him, Zhang Hai swallowed a mouthful of saliva and asked in a low voice, "Is this it?" "Well, this is it." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Louis Quezada glanced at the GPS in his hand and said with certainty. At the same time, he also swallowed a mouthful of saliva because the cave in front of him looked really eye-catching. The discovery of this cave was quite accidental. During the United States high-altitude landing operation, a plane happened to hit this snowy mountain and then fell not far away from the mountainside. The model of that plane was R-4D. Everyone may not be familiar with this name because this plane was also built during World War II. However, it belonged to the Army and did not appear many times. After all, the United States Army did not send many of them out. Most of them were from the Navy, and the Navy's plane was called the C-47. When the United States joined the war, they got a lot of these planes and flew them all over the world. The British called this plane the Dakota, the Xueqi called it the Myling, and the Europeans during the European War also called it the Albatross. At that time, more than 80% of the planes used in the United States airborne operations were this kind of plane, so it was not an exaggeration to say that this plane changed the course of World War II. During the United States airborne operations, an R-4D plane fell here. There were a total of 9 people on the plane, but in fact, all 9 of them were still alive. However, after 3 of them found this cave, they wanted to go in alone to take a look. Then they were killed. Of course, this incident was not reported. Otherwise, why would 3 people die inexplicably when the pilot, who was severely burned, survived? Later, these people relied on 2 cans of peanut butter hidden by one of their comrades to wait for the rescue team to arrive. This cave was then discovered by the Americans. However, after the Americans went in, they found that it was actually just a military base. There were many empty buildings and materials inside, but no people. It seemed that the theory that Hitler fled here was not correct. Later, they emptied the research materials here and started a Cold War with the Soviets. That was how things unfolded. But this time, it was Zhang Hai and the others who came. Looking at the cave in front of them, Zhang Hai and the others were not in a hurry to go in because no one knew what was going on inside. Zhang Hai pulled Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai, who were clearly a little impatient, and exchanged glances with Louis Quezada. The 2 of them were not in a hurry to go in. Instead, they set up camp here. If there was anything, they could talk about it after tonight. Since the cave was right in front of them, Zhang Hai was not in a hurry, and Louis Quezada was even less anxious. Just like a few nights ago, the 6 motorcycles lined up in a row, blocking the middle. Then, Zhang Hai and the others went to sleep in separate tents. Although Zhang Hai kept dreaming that night, he was really curious about this place. But he did not go in alone. The next morning, after Zhang Hai and Louis Quezada finished packing up, they walked into the cave. This cave was obviously dug by humans, but it should have been here a long time ago. Zhang Hai and the others were still very orderly. After all, there were more than 1 or 2 people who knew about military affairs here. The 2 dogs, Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai, took the lead. They carried flashlights and hat lamps and went in to explore. Zhang Hai was quite confident in his 2 dogs. With their level and strength, they were far from being harmed by ordinary traps. If there were any accidents, they could deal with them and even wait for Zhang Hai and the others to arrive. Even if they could not, they could still retreat. This was something that Zhang Hai was very confident in. Then came Connerson Peters and Isaac Williams. The 2 of them were in front, followed by Wallace Shelley and Jittered Maud. Zhang Hai, Galena, and Bell were on the left, while Louis Quezada and Keys Leslie were on the right. Azalina and Quezada Hall were at the end of the group, keeping an eye on the situation outside. Each of them had 2 flashlights, one on top of their heads, and one tied to their guns. They illuminated the dark parts of the cave, making it as bright as day. The further they went, the deeper they felt the cave was. I can see that the Third Reich was really powerful back then. If it had really unified Europe and Soviet Russia, the situation in the world would probably be completely different now. Louis Quezada also looked at the wall beside him. Thinking about how someone could dig such a cave in the Antarctic 70 years ago, He felt that it was a little unbelievable. At least, it was hard for him to imagine. The problem is that he lost. In fact, there is nothing bad about the current world, right? Hearing Louis Quixada's words, Zhang Hai smiled. He did not care about history, nor did he care about which empire was the strongest. He only cared about himself. You could say that he was selfish, you could say that he was shameless, and you could say that he was unpatriotic. In fact, the only person Zhang Hai loved was himself. Other than himself, there were only those who were related to him. Beyond these people there would be countries, nations, and so on. These were the life values of an ordinary person. You could not use any moral standards to kidnap him because he did not care about you at all. He was no longer a hot-blooded 17 or 18-year-old young man. His blood had long since turned cold. Well, although I don't want to admit it, you are right, Louis Quixada said in a low voice as he shrugged. Woof 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 woof. At this moment, a few dog barks came from afar. It was neither fast nor slow. After hearing it, Zhang Hai nodded secretly. This was also his, Goldie's, and Xiao Bai's secret signal. If they encountered an enemy that they could not defeat, they would retreat quietly. If they were discovered, they would bark quickly. If there was no danger and they had reached the end, they would bark slowly to remind Zhang Hai and the others. Now that the two dogs were barking slowly, Zhang Hai knew that there would be no problem. So he also quickened his pace and walked inside. As they turned a corner in the cave, a huge metal door appeared in front of Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai and the others could not help but stop and look at the door with a shocked expression. This giant door was really big, about 7 or 8 meters tall. It was made of pure metal. In this cave at the same time it looked gloomy, but at the same time there was a sense of deterrence. In the middle of the door, there was a huge symbol of a reverse cross standing there. However, perhaps because it was too old, a lot of paint had fallen off on the anti-cross sign. It was faintly black, but overall, it was still gray. At this time, Goldie and Xiao Bai were in front of the door. When they saw Zhang Hai and the others coming, they stopped barking and sniffed around. What should we do now? Looking at the door in front of him, Zhang Hai walked over and gently patted the metal door. He heard a clanging sound, then turned his head and looked at Louis Quixada. According to the information, this door can only be opened with a mechanism. Let me see, it should be here. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Louis Quixada thought for a while and began to look around. Sure enough, it didn't take long for him to find a protruding stone. If he looked carefully, he would find a very hidden circle on the stone. This was the mechanism to enter the door. Seeing this, Louis Quixada couldn't help but press his right hand on it. Unfortunately, the mechanism he had imagined would be triggered, and the door did not open. Perhaps it was because it was too old, rusted, or frozen. In short, Louis Quixada's face turned red, but the door did not move at all. Let me try. Seeing that his boss could not do it, Habakkuk Hall also went over, but unfortunately, it was still useless. Then, Sears Leslie and Isaac Williams also tried, but the result was no use. Looking at them, Zhang Hai could not stand it anymore. He walked over and motioned for Isaac Williams to move aside. To be honest, the three people from the CIB were not very optimistic about Zhang Hai. In their opinion, other than being rich, Zhang Hai did not have any other abilities. The ones they really needed to pay attention to in this team were Belle from the Triangular State and Azalina. Of course, they had to be especially careful of Knerson Peters in close combat. This guy's close combat ability was not bad. If they were to rank the danger level of Zhang Hai's team, Azalina, a former agent and assassin, would be number 1. Bale, a soldier of the Triangular State, would be number 2. Galina Vasilkaya would be number 3. Knerson Peters would be number 4. And Wallace Shelley would be number 5. What? Not Zhang Hai. Xiao Bai would be 6th, Xiao Huang would be 7th, and Zhang Hai would be 8th. If Zhang Hai knew what they were thinking, he would probably kill them. But because Zhang Hai was rich, Isaac did not say anything and just backed away. He also wanted to see Zhang Hai lose face. However, to his disappointment, when Zhang Hai put his hand on the stone, he could feel that the inside of the stone was rusted to death. For an average person, there was no way to move it. Unfortunately, he was not an average person. Gritting his teeth, Zhang Hai's physical fitness, which was 8 times that of an ordinary person's, burst forth in an instant. Zhang Hai's hand forcibly pushed the rusty mechanism an inch further in. Then, he exerted more force and pushed it another inch. Even with this last inch, he was able to force open a gap in the door in front of him. Although the gap wasn't big, it wasn't a problem for a person to walk in. Phew! Let's go! Looking at the door stuck there, Zhang Hai also let go of his hand and said with a sigh of relief. Seeing Zhang Hai open the door like this, Louis Quezada and the others were stunned. Chapter 953. Who the hell, born with divine strength? Looking at Zhang Hai opening the door, Louis Quezada and the others were stunned. Among them, Habakkuk Hall looked at Zhang Hai in surprise. He didn't expect Zhang Hai to have such divine strength. Just now, they saw clearly that Zhang Hai didn't use any tricks. He just used his strength to push the switch in. For them, how could this be possible? It was too cruel. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai just smiled, then signaled the two dogs to go in first. After waiting for a while, after hearing the two dogs barking, Zhang Hai and the others also went in. After Zhang Hai and the others went in, Louis Quezada and the others immediately followed. But after entering the door, Zhang Hai and the others couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Because after walking in, you will find that there is actually nothing here. This is just a very large hall, very large. In the entire hall, there are many tables and chairs, but these tables and chairs are now frozen. Although there is a lot of dust on them, they are not rotten. In the middle of the hall, there is a platform that looks like a speech platform. On top of it, there is a red reverse cross with black words, representing who owns this place. The entire space is gray, as if it can't be washed clean. Other than that, there is nothing else here. It really looks very ordinary. Boss, there is a distribution map here. At this time, Belle looked around in the distance, then said to Zhang Hai. Hearing Belle's words, Zhang Hai and the others looked at each other, then walked over and checked it. The internal distribution map here is engraved on a huge stone, which will not be destroyed by the passage of time. The distribution map on the stone is very deep and obvious. Zhang Hai and the others should be in the main hall now. In addition to the main hall, there is a rest area, living area, planting area, information area, and military area. Rather than calling it an underground fortress, it would be more appropriate to call it an underground city. Back then, when the Germans built this place, it seemed like they were really going to use it as a place to live. Not only were there troops stationed here, but there were also civilians and scientists. It seemed like the Chancellor was really going to move the elites of the Third Reich here. There's almost no important information here. Basically, all the important information has been taken away by the Federation. Looking at the map, Louis Quezada said to Zhang Hai. Indeed, there is no information on this map. Whether it was about weapons or people's livelihood, the Americans would not stay. Let's go take a look. However, it was a pity that Zhang Hai didn't want weapons, nor did he want people's livelihood. What he wanted was information about the totem. If they didn't have it here, then it would be troublesome for him to get it from the United States. What they wanted was most likely Zhang Hai's farming methods. At that time, he would have no choice but to give up. After preparing for the worst, Zhang Hai's first step was to go to the reference room. According to what was written on the map, the reference room was behind the plantation area. To go to the reference room, they must first go to the plantation area. Zhang Hai and the others walked towards the plantation area first. After passing through a gate and a long corridor, the plantation area appeared in front of Zhang Hai. Looking at the plantation area in front of them, Zhang Hai and the others couldn't help but feel a little surprised. This was because the plantation area was really big. At a glance, it wasn't small at all. Most importantly, this was only one plantation area. According to the map, there were almost 20 such plantation areas. According to Zhang Hai's estimation, this place was about 500 acres, which was about 2 square kilometers in size. 20 of them would be 40 square kilometers in size. He had to admit that these Germans were really powerful. They could actually make so much space in the ice and snow of Antarctica. In fact, 70 years later, this would definitely be a huge project. But 70 years ago, the Germans quietly made such a thing. It was really terrifying. The soil here is so fertile. Knerson Peters, who had been following Harriman Fells in the fields these days, squatted down and grabbed a handful of soil. He couldn't help but feel surprised. This was underground, not above ground. So although the temperature was low, it wasn't as low as above ground. The water vapor didn't completely freeze. Although he didn't know where the soil came from, in Zhang Hai's view, the soil here wasn't worse than the soil in Zhang Hai's hometown in the northeast. The soil here could be kneaded into a ball with just a light pinch. Moreover, it was not like mud. This was soil, because if you shook it again, the soil would scatter. This was completely different from yellow soil and sand. This was the most suitable black soil for farming. This soil has been untouched for more than 70 years. It would be strange if it wasn't fertile. Hearing Knerson Peters's words, Louis Quezada also looked at the soil and said with a smile. Then Zhang Hai and the others no longer bothered about the soil problem and continued to walk inside. They had to admit that the Germans were really creative. The planting areas later were actually different. Some were smaller and were surrounded one by one. They should be used to raise chickens or pigs. There were also some puddles that should be used to raise fish. As for the land that Zhang Hai saw at the beginning, it should be used to grow wheat. It was known that foreigners like to eat bread and not rice, so their main food source was wheat. After walking through these planting areas, Zhang Hai and the others came to the reference room from afar. But when he walked in, he found that the place was much messier than the outside. There were dust and smashed tables and chairs everywhere. There were also a lot of papers on the ground. It was a mess because when the Americans found this place, February was almost over. They had to rush back before February to transport the important things here. The reference room was naturally the most important, so they took the most important materials and left in a panic. Some of the less important materials were scattered here. For them, these things were nothing. After Zhang Hai walked into the reference room, he picked up a piece of paper and patted off the dust on it. Zhang Hai looked at it carefully. As a result, after reading a few lines, he threw the paper away. It turned out to be a poem praising Hitler and the Führer. Zhang Hai had nothing to say about it. He was not here to look for this thing. Mr. Zhang, what are you looking for? Do you need our help? Seeing Zhang Hai bend down and pick up a piece of paper again, Louis Quezada couldn't help but ask Zhang Hai with a smile. However, Zhang Hai shook his head. What a joke. How could he tell him what he wanted? So, he flatly refused. Seeing that Zhang Hai didn't want to talk to him, Louis Quezada just shrugged his shoulders indifferently. Since Zhang Hai had already decided, then he might as well listen to him. Then he took his people and casually browsed through the information in the room. At the same time, he couldn't help but sigh. Germany was still very powerful in the past. If it wasn't for them seeking death, then perhaps the situation of the world would be different now. In fact, if one wasn't in the position, one shouldn't meddle in politics. Looking at it now, the biggest problem with Germany's strategy was that they didn't destroy the United Kingdom and unify Europe first. Instead, they went to attack Russia. After all, there were too few Germans, so the initial elites were quickly defeated. The logistics couldn't keep up, and the rhythm couldn't be set. This slowly became troublesome. But in fact, there were also scholars who said that Germany had no choice but to do so. After the end of World War I, Germany's economy had already been destroyed by Europe. After Hitler came to power, although the economy recovered a little, the nature of the people was still very bad. They needed to occupy more land and more living space to stimulate their national pride and strong combat power. As the saying went, it was just drawing a big picture to make the people proud and stimulate their combat power. That was all. When they attacked Europe, they actually did well in the beginning. But when they attacked the United Kingdom, there were some problems. At that time, the world's strongest country was not so easy to defeat. The United Kingdom was an island country. Yes, it was not connected to the European continent. If they wanted to attack the United Kingdom, they would need to cross the sea. However, Germany's army was invincible. How could their navy compete with the United Kingdom, the world's #1 country? So, after the evacuation of Dunkirk, Germany was actually unable to attack the United Kingdom. The bombing of London was just for show, to dispel their feelings of resistance. As long as the British did not surrender, the Germans could not do much. However, the domestic economy needed to be stimulated by continuous victories. Therefore, the Germans had no choice but to give up on the British and turn to attack Soviet Russia. However, Soviet Russia was bitterly cold. During the summer, everything would be fine, but it would be over in the winter. At that time, Germany's main tactic was not to push, but to use blitzkrieg and mechanized troops to push forward. But once it was winter, the petrol would freeze, and tanks would need a few hours to move. Under such circumstances, a bicycle or a horse could run dozens of times faster than a tank. How could you fight? So, when winter came, Germany was at a loss. Originally, Operation Typhoon was going well and they had occupied a lot of territory. But they were blocked by the cold and could not advance. So, the problem of attacking the United Kingdom came again. If there was no way to win, then there was no way to stimulate the enthusiasm of the people, and there was no way to prevent the economy from collapsing. Therefore, they could only open up a third route. These were all things that they had no choice but to do. Back then, Germany was more like the ancient nomads. They had to use war to support war. Once they failed, they would be finished. This was also the main reason for their failure. Of course, Italy was weak, and Japan did not restrain the Soviet Union. Instead, they provoked the United States. When all these factors were added together, it led to the destruction of the Third Reich. Chapter 954. How Germany lost had nothing to do with Zhang Hai. What he was most concerned about now was the thing he was looking for. Zhang Hai picked up every piece of paper on the ground and flipped through them casually. Perhaps they saw what Zhang Hai was doing, but the people around him also moved. Knerson Peters, Azalina, and Wallace Shelley also picked up the papers. Only Bell Lester and Galena were still guarding against the CIA people. It was said that many hands made light work. Not long after, Zhang Hai had about 100 pieces of paper in his hands. Zhang Hai looked through them one by one. The more he looked, the more disappointed he became. However, his hope also grew. This was because the hundreds of pieces of paper were basically poems, records of local customs, or some interesting stories. Zhang Hai was very sure that there was no dragon in Huaxia in Europe. Now, the interesting stories written on the papers might contain records of the existence of the dragon-shaped badge. After all, there were even records of 10,000 characters, which was the 10,000 characters that Buddha Xiong spoke of. Therefore, although these pieces of paper were wrong, Zhang Hai did not care and continued to flip through them. Soon, they found that in addition to some pieces of paper that had fallen, there were still some documents left in some cabinets. In the middle of these documents, Zhang Hai's eyes suddenly widened. He felt that he had found something. Zhang Hai didn't know what was written on this piece of paper because it was written in German. However, Zhang Hai recognized the dragon emblem printed on this piece of paper. It seems that this thing was most likely an introduction to this thing. Therefore, Zhang Hai gestured to Azalina and Wallace Shelley, who were still searching. The two also understood Zhang Hai's gesture. When they quietly reported to Zhang Hai, they saw the paper in Zhang Hai's hand. At the same time, Zhang Hai also pointed to the badge. After knowing their goal this time, the two of them were more purposeful in their search. As for Zhang Hai, he quietly called Goldie over and stuffed the paper into his winter clothes. Then, he pretended to continue his search. To be honest, although Louis Quezada was curious about what Zhang Hai was looking for, to be honest, he had already seen the things here. What was written on the paper were some geographical records, some imagination of the people of the Third Reich, or some poems that praised them. To be honest, if some writers or geographers were to get their hands on this information, they might be very happy. However, as an agent and a soldier, Louis Quezada was quite disdainful of these things. In his opinion, these things were just the imagination of the people from the empire who were sucking up to them. There was no basis for any reality at all. Most of the things were nonsense. Therefore, he felt a little speechless that Zhang Hai was interested in these things. However, this did not prevent him from bringing Zhang Hai here. We're almost done. Basically, we can't find it. After searching here for about 3 hours, Zhang Hai and the others temporarily stopped. After Azalina gestured a 6 to Zhang Hai, she whispered to Zhang Hai. Wallace Shelley also gestured an 8, which meant that they had found 14 things related to the dragon badge. Of course, it was impossible for all of them to be related to the dragon badge. Many of them were related to the page number, which was the context of the dragon badge pattern. Zhang Hai also found 6, which added up to more than 20. Phew, it's almost time for lunch. There's a lot of dust here. Should we go out and eat, or go inside? After thinking about it, Zhang Hai felt that translating these things first was the right thing to do, so after hesitating, he said to Louis Quezada. Louis Quezada smiled when he heard Zhang Hai's words. Either is fine. To be honest, he was tired of staying here for a long time. Now that he could leave, he was still very happy. Therefore, under the signal of everyone walked outside together. When they came, they had to be careful. When they went back, they knew that it was safe, so they were faster. After more than an hour, they returned to the place where they set up camp. After arriving at the camp, the two sides calmly separated. Zhang Hai and the others returned to their tents, and so did the CIB people. But not long after they entered the tent, Belle Lester, Azalina, Galina, and Connerson Peters came out one after another and began to prepare dinner. Only Zhang Hai and Wallace Shelley were left in the tent. Of course, there was also Goldie. Those papers were hidden on his body. What do you think Zhang Hai got after he went in? Louis Quezada frowned as he looked at Zhang Hai and the others in the distance. Looking at Zhang Hai's actions now, he was sure that Zhang Hai must have gotten something, but what did he get? I've been recording their movements the entire time, but I didn't notice them taking anything from inside. I only remember that Connerson Peters once grabbed a handful of soil. Could it be that they came for the soil? Hearing Louis Quezada's words, Jittered Maud asked with some doubts. She also didn't quite understand Zhang Hai and the others. It's possible. Louis Quezada squinted his eyes and whispered. In his opinion, Zhang Hai's business was mainly based on his cattle. And if the cattle want to grow well, they naturally need to eat good grass. Zhang Hai made a lot of money by selling grass, and since he sells grass, he needs good soil. Therefore, Zhang Hai coming here for the soil was not without reason. Now that he thought about it, could it be that the soil here has some kind of magical effect? Louis Quezada looked at Zhang Hai and said in a deep voice, "Let's see if Zhang Hai still goes in tomorrow. If he still goes in, we'll get some soil back for research. If he doesn't go, then we'll pass this news back to our research institute and wait for our research institute to come and study this soil. This soil is likely to be Zhang Hai's secret." Although Zhang Hai didn't know that these guys were studying him in the wrong direction, he was quite happy that these guys were studying him in the wrong direction. Inside the tent, Zhang Hai and Wallace Shelley rearranged the papers and then rearranged them according to the page number. After rearranging them, they entered them into the microcomputer that Wallace Shelley brought with her. Soon, a paragraph of text was translated from German into Chinese. Although some sentences were not smooth, Zhang Hai could probably understand it. The person who wrote this was called Bruno Berg. This person was actually quite famous in Germany back then. He was once a famous anthropologist, and his most famous action was to go to the Tibetan area of Xueqi with Ernst Cypher to look for the legendary Shambhala cave, which was also called the Earth's axis, the whole of time and space. Originally, this thing was just a conjecture. In 1938, Germany had sent people to look for it, but they didn't find anything. In 1941, Germany lost 500,000 people, 1,300 tanks, and 2,500 artillery on the battlefield of Soviet Russia. The originally good situation took a turn for the worse. Under such circumstances, the leader of the SS, Himmler, remembered the legend about the Earth's axis and hoped to return time to 1939 so that Germany could correct the mistakes they made and start the war again. So in 1943, Germany launched this plan again and went to the Tibetan area of Xueqi to look for the cave. Seeing this, Zhang Hai's eyes narrowed. Although his common sense told him that these things were nonsense, he still suppressed his temper and continued to read. The information they found was not so much information, but rather a diary. It was the information reported by Bruno Berg, but reported in the form of a diary. It recorded in detail that after they arrived in the Tibetan area, they talked with the ruler of the Tibetan area and obtained their help to go to the snowy mountain in the Tibetan area to look for the Shambhala cave. However, there was some discrepancy between the legend and the fact that they didn't find it. They found it and entered the cave, but after entering, they found that the cave had a huge amount of space-time energy. It was far from what ordinary people like them could enter, so they went back. Looking at the above translation, Zhang Hai couldn't help but ponder for a moment. He was thinking about the authenticity of this thing. It was reasonable to say that such an important information like this should have been seen by the Americans when they first came here. Then the question is, since the Americans already saw it, why didn't they take it away, but instead threw it away like a piece of garbage? Don't say that the Americans don't believe in this. In fact, they believe in these things very much. For example, the 51st District of the United States. But why didn't they take it away? There was only one possibility, that is, they didn't believe in this saying, or they already found it, but it was also useless. No matter which one it was, Zhang Hai felt a little flustered. But looking at the written information, even the coordinates were very detailed, it didn't seem like nonsense. This made Zhang Hai somewhat at a loss. Boss, are we going to the Tibetan area? Looking at Zhang Hai's somewhat bewildered appearance, Huali Shelley hesitated for a moment and asked Zhang Hai. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai thought for a moment and shook his head. Don't worry for the time being, we'll talk about it when we have time. Anyway, we know where this dragon badge came from, so there's no need to worry. Looking at the very clear coordinates written on the information, Zhang Hai tore the information in half and threw it into the alcohol stove in the tent. In any case, this time their goal was achieved. Now it's time to see if Zhang Hai really wants to see it, but even if he wants to see it, now is not the time. Chapter 955. Now that he had made up his mind, things were much easier to handle. The next morning, Zhang Hai and the others went in again, mainly to find if there was any missing information. After confirming that there was no missing information, Zhang Hai and the others returned. Luis Quezada and the others also obtained some soil samples. Zhang Hai was very puzzled. What did they want to do with this? However, since they wanted it, Zhang Hai could not say much. After everything was prepared, Zhang Hai and the others left the cave on the third day and returned to the scientific research station. On the way back, Zhang Hai and the others took 5 days. This was not an accident, but purely because of the wind direction. The difference between the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere was that the southern wind was warm, while the northern wind was warm in the southern hemisphere. This was because north of them was the equator, which was the warmest place in the world. It was summer in Antarctica, which meant that the southern wind was blowing. Although it was still very cold, -20 to 30 degrees Celsius, it was still very cold. When Zhang Hai and the others came, the wind was with them, so naturally, they ran fast. However, when they returned, the wind was against them, so their speed was naturally slower. Moreover, sometimes they had to avoid storms and other things. After all, winter was approaching, and Antarctica's summer only lasted for 3 months. Once they entered March, the weather would quickly deteriorate. Fortunately, there were no surprises or dangers along the way, they just slowed down a bit. 5 days later, Zhang Hai and the others returned to the scientific research station. After taking a bath, Zhang Hai returned the snowmobiles to the team and slept. The next morning, Zhang Hai and the others boarded the ship to return to Tierra del Fuego. After more than 20 hours of bumpy sailing, they finally returned to Tierra del Fuego. The moment they went ashore, Luis Quezada and the others breathed a sigh of relief. The feeling of floating on the sea was indeed uncomfortable, and most importantly, their mission was completed. They returned from Tierra del Fuego to Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. After getting off the plane, Zhang Hai and the others went to the hotel that the CIB had already prepared. As soon as they entered the hotel, Luis Quezada could not help but whistle happily. Haha, I'm a little excited. I finally don't have to stay in that world of ice and snow anymore. Aren't you happy? Luis Quezada said excitedly as he looked at Zhang Hai. For him, it was great that he didn't have to stay in Antarctica. It's all right. This trip was for naught. Zhang Hai shrugged and said indifferently. What he got, no one knew except for him and Wallace Shelley. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Luis Quezada also laughed. Although I don't know what you want to get in Antarctica, to be honest, brother, if there is anything, it would have been taken away by the scholars of the Federation long ago. Why would it be left for you after 70 years? After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Luis Quezada smiled and said. In his opinion, Zhang Hai had gained nothing. This was the right path. If Zhang Hai had really gained something, it would be troublesome. Do you want to go and play again tonight? After Luis Quezada saw that Zhang Hai's mood wasn't very good after listening to his words. He wanted to please all the rich people, so he leaned over and whispered to Zhang Hai while raising his eyebrows. When he said play, he naturally meant going to the Boca area. Zhang Hai was still very clear about what was there. Although the experience that night made Zhang Hai feel very magical, it does not mean that he is a pervert. He is not prepared to do things like play with little girls too much. Wicked. So after hearing Luis Quezada's words, Zhang Hai shook his head gently. Forget it for today. I want to have a good rest, and then I will return to Winthrop tomorrow. Looking at Louis Quezada, Zhang Hai said indifferently. Hearing that Zhang Hai did not want to go, Louis Quezada did not force him. After chatting with Zhang Hai for a while, he left with his men. Zhang Hai also gave Belle and Connerson Peters a vacation. If they want to play, they can also go. These two did go to play, but they did not go to the Boca area. Instead, they found a place nearby. Although the legal place to play according to the government is in the Boca area, there are also many illegal goods and secret societies nearby. These people are protected by the government, and they don't pay taxes. Naturally, they earn less, but the quality is not too bad. Belle and Connerson found two places nearby to play for the night. As for Zhang Hai, he hugged his three sisters and slept well. As for whether there was any exercise before going to sleep, no one knew. Even the CIB people did not know, because their listening devices could not escape Azalina's eyes. Boss, that's it. While Zhang Hai and the others were sleeping peacefully, in a club in the Boca district, the CIB's explosives expert, Habakkuk Hall, poured a glass of whiskey into his mouth, then looked at Louis Quezada and said, "To be honest, this time's mission looked like they had suffered a lot, and then they came back with nothing to show for it. For battle maniacs like them, they were somewhat unhappy. But in front of Zhang Hai, they didn't dare to show off. But now that Zhang Hai was not here, it did not prevent them from asking. This is the best result. Why? Are you really going to fight with those guys? To be honest, along the way, Zhang Hai and the others are not to be trifled with." Louis Quezada squinted his eyes and took a sip of his whiskey. Along the way, he constantly refreshed his mind on the strength of Zhang Hai and the others. From humans to dogs, the strength of Zhang Hai and the others was quite impressive. If they really fought, the elites may not be a match for those guys. From their equipment, strength, tactics and physique, those guys were not at a disadvantage. Well, this should be the easiest mission I have ever completed. Hearing Louis Quezada say this, the people on the other side did not have any other thoughts. Just like Louis Quezada knew, in the United States, one should never provoke the rich. Now, although they did not understand it very well, they also knew that Zhang Hai was a rich man. Seeing that his subordinates were so obedient, Louis Quezada also laughed. To be honest, in his heart, he hoped that Zhang Hai would do something. If Zhang Hai did something, there would be a flaw, and if there was a flaw, there would be a reason. Louis Quezada was not a good person. If you told an agent that he was a good person, it would be almost like telling a joke. You said that he was hanging around with Zhang Hai. Did he really not have any intention of probing Zhang Hai's background? Stop joking. To be honest, this was Zhang Hai. If it were other rich people, they would not dare to go abroad with them. It should be known that these guys were not good people. Even if they could not find out Zhang Hai's secret, and if Zhang Hai's side was not strong enough, they might kidnap him. Such things had happened before. So thankfully, Zhang Hai's strength was strong enough. In the situation where the benefits were not proportional, these guys still decided to keep their jobs. Zhang Hai was not an easy person to deal with. But now it was quite good. If Zhang Hai just returned to the United States and lost his curiosity, then for them, the mission would be considered completed. Although they did not make a lot of money, some small money was not bad. Of course, they also brought back the soil. If the soil was really useful, then they would be rich. Zhang Hai did not give Louis Quezada any more opportunities to get close to him. After waking up the next morning, Zhang Hai and the others boarded the plane that he had chartered. They flew from Buenos Aires to Boston. To be honest, flying from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere was quite tiring. There was no direct flight from Buenos Aires to Boston. Zhang Hai had said before that he had chartered the plane. When he got off the plane, he naturally had to go through customs or something. It was quite troublesome. However, after passing through customs and arriving at the parking lot, Edward Anderson and Robbins Garcia had been waiting for a long time. They were here to pick up Zhang Hai and the others. Of course, they also had to mention a little about the harvest during this period. So, Galina, Belle, and the others sensibly got into another car, while Zhang Hai and Azalina got into the first F-750. As the engine started, the two behemoths also drove out of the airport. At the same time, Edward Anderson and Robbins Garcia also introduced the recent situation to Zhang Hai. As time passed, The Antarctic was getting colder and colder. Winter was coming. However, Winthrop was getting warmer and warmer. After entering February, the temperature in Winthrop during the day could reach above 0. Although it was still a little cold, the snow could no longer be frozen during the day. The sun shone on the grassland, and large patches of snow melted into water. However, at night, the temperature would drop to about -5 degrees Celsius. Then, the melted snow would turn into ice cubes. However, Zhanghai had another advantage, and that was the ocean monsoon. The ocean would never freeze, and the sea breeze would bring warmth into the grassland, waking it up first. According to Robbins Garcia, they had been driving the herds to stay in the meadow for a long time. This was because the herds could crush the ice, and at the same time, the grass in early spring was rich in nutrients. "Boss, we are preparing to get some fish seedlings and grass seeds." Looking at Zhanghai behind, Edward Anderson said with a smile. Zhanghai had given him such a generous salary, so he naturally wanted to repay Zhanghai. Releasing fish seedlings was the most important thing. Chapter 956. "Hi, Mr. Zhang, Ai Dehua, you're here." And Eva, nicknamed Iron Bull, shouted loudly at Zhanghai from afar. Hearing his voice, Zhanghai also turned the steering wheel and drove in the direction of his shout. Not long after, the car stopped about 5 or 6 meters in front of him. Then Zhanghai and Edward Anderson got out together. As soon as they got out, and Eva greeted them with a big smile. Zhanghai had been back for 3 days. In these 3 days, Zhanghai first comforted his women at home, especially Qi Jie and Qi Ya who had returned. These 2 girls were taught a lesson by Qi Li at home, so they were also full of anger. Now that they saw Zhanghai, they couldn't help but feel angry. In the past few days, they had been teaching Zhanghai a lesson. Of course, their so-called teaching was teaching Zhanghai a lesson in bed. They were determined to get pregnant before Qi Li. Unfortunately, there was no movement at the moment. These days, Zhanghai was occupied by them at night. During the day, he was not idle. After being busy for 3 days, he was finally able to go out of the house. After all, his women sometimes did have some small tricks up their sleeves, but when it came to making a living in the manor, they still understood the importance of it. Buying fish seedlings could be said to be a big deal, so they had to temporarily put aside the matter of dealing with Zhanghai. So today, Zhanghai came to the port of Boston with Edward Anderson. As for Azalina, who was supposed to follow, Zhanghai did not let her follow. He wanted to live a life without women. It was really too tiring. With Zhanghai's own strength and confidence in Boston, Azalina did not force Zhanghai to take them with him. They were happy to stay at home. Zhanghai and Edward Anderson drove away. After arriving at the dock, and Eva, who had already greeted them, appeared immediately. It was obvious that he had been waiting for a long time. Speaking of which, and Eva was different from before. When Zhanghai first bought his fish seedlings a few years ago, this guy could only be regarded as a lower-middle businessman here. After all, there were many people who had bigger territories and more varieties than him. In addition, he was a black man. Although there were many good black people in the United States, white people and even yellow people did not trust black people that much. If it were not for Edward Anderson's recommendation, Zhanghai might not have come to him to buy fish seedlings. Most importantly, Americans did not like to raise fish seedlings. They preferred to go to the deep sea to catch fish, so the fish seedlings did not sell well. But as the saying goes, a scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at with new eyes. Not to mention, Zhanghai had not seen him for nearly 2 years. Ever since he sold the fish seedlings to Zhanghai, his business was still like this in the first year, half dead. But everything changed in the second year. When Zhanghai's seafood went on the market, everyone felt the benefits of Zhanghai's seafood. So many people were inquiring about where Zhanghai's fish came from, because they knew that Zhanghai also bought his fish seedlings. After asking around, they finally heard about Aniva. His side became popular because the quality of the fish he sold was good, and the price was not expensive. Most importantly, it was possible to raise Zhanghai's fish. Therefore, everyone was moved by his offer. Over the past year, Aniva's fish seedlings business had grown bigger and bigger. He had also borrowed money from the bank and expanded his original fish seedlings business by 5 times. But the supply still could not meet the demand. A large number of people came to buy them. Although the fish he raised might not be as good as Zhang Hai's fish, his business was still very good. The quality was there, so even if he could not raise Zhang Hai's fish, there were still people willing to do business with him. Now in the past year, he had jumped to the top 10 among Boston's fish seedlings merchants in one fell swoop, and he had the intention of catching up. It was not a good thing. However, as the saying goes, one should not forget the person who dug the well when drinking water. Although business was business in the eyes of Americans, he was still very grateful to Zhang Hai. After receiving a call from Edward Anderson to pick seedlings, Zhang Hai's fish were all personally selected by him. Of course, he did not raise them himself, but he ran around the country and finally selected the best quality and largest seedlings. Today, Zhang Hai came to see the seedlings, sign a contract with him, and choose the seedlings to buy. Hey, Iron Bull, I heard that your business here is getting bigger and bigger. Looking at Aniva, Zhang Hai smiled and said. Zhang Hai didn't mind the stench on Aniva's body and hugged him. Aniva was also very happy about this. One must know that black people with good temperament were also a bit strange. When he made friends, he basically only made friends with people of the same level. This was because friends had to tolerate everything about them, such as their skin color, their dress, their hobbies, and even the smell on their body. Zhang Hai did not care about the fishy smell on him and hugged him, which made him very grateful. He also sincerely regarded Zhang Hai as a friend. The smile on his face became wider and wider, and his 2 rows of big white teeth were also exposed. Hey, Zhang, my friend, this is all thanks to you. Come in, let's talk in the fish shed. After saying the same thing to Zhang Hai, he smiled and led Zhang Hai into the fish shed in the distance. As soon as Zhang Hai walked in, he found that this fish shed was actually built in the sea. It was the same as the last time he came here, but the scale was much bigger. I have 10 fish sheds like this one, but the best seedlings you want are all here. Seeing the curiosity in Zhang Hai's eyes, and Eva smiled and said. Then he led Zhang Hai and Edward Anderson to a huge net cage. He started the machine next to him and slowly lifted the net cage up. Then some small fry were pulled up by the net cage and floated to the surface. And Eva then scooped up a handful of fry and showed them to Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai nodded and said, I'm sorry. At the end of November last year, Brother Edward told me the types of fry you want this year. I specially found these. Take a look. And Eva said as he handed the fry to Zhang Hai and Edward Anderson. After a successful breeding, Edward Anderson also had confidence in this water area. No matter how this mysterious water area was formed, it had nothing to do with him. He only knew that this water area could make a lot of money, and he would honestly work for Zhang Hai in the following days. This was the most important thing. So in November last year, Edward Anderson, whose confidence had doubled, asked Aniva to get some good seedlings. If Zhang Hai wanted to buy them, he would also buy this kind of high-grade fish. In fact, it was reasonable to say that the American redfish was a good fish, but Zhang Hai was no longer interested in it. He wanted better fish. Now in the hands of Zhang Hai and Edward Anderson, there was a better fish, white pomfret. Some people would say that basically everyone had eaten pomfret before. It was not expensive in China, so how could it be expensive in the United States? In fact, those who would say this basically knew nothing about pomfret. Pomfret, also known as mirrorfish, could be divided into many types. The worst was the silver pomfret, followed by the golden pomfret, red pomfret, freshwater white pomfret, knife pomfret, black pomfret, gray pomfret, spiny pomfret, spotted pomfret, snowflake pomfret, South American pomfret, striped pomfret, and so on. There were different types of pomfret, and the price difference was quite big. Among them, the more common golden pomfret was very low in price. It was considered a low-level seafood, but white pomfret was different. White pomfret was divided into 2 types: freshwater white pomfret and white pomfret. This kind of fish was mainly distributed in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. It was not found in the Atlantic Ocean. In China, it was very common for this kind of fish to be sold for more than 100 renminbi per catty. However, since Zhang Hai was raising them here, it was naturally impossible to sell them at such a low price. He sold them by the kilogram. The initial price of 1 kilogram was $50, which was $10 more expensive than the red pomfret in the United States. Most importantly, this kind of fish also grew quickly. Looking at the fry in front of him, Edward Anderson casually picked one out, opened its belly, smelled it, and ate a small piece of meat to determine whether these fish had been drugged or were sick. After the inspection, he nodded gently, indicating that there was nothing wrong with these fish. Seeing that Edward Anderson had approved, Zhang Hai did not say much. He threw the small fish back into the net cage and nodded to Aniva. Seeing that Zhang Hai approved this quality, Aniva was also relieved. The first type of fish was ordered. Then he continued to lead Zhang Hai and the others to the back. The second net cage was the tuna he specially picked, the so-called bonito. However, their bonito was different from the general Pacific bonito, the so-called small tuna that could not grow up. This kind of bonito could be regarded as a giant bonito. Zhang Hai only took the elite route. If it was an ordinary small tuna, he would be too lazy to raise them. According to the price announced by the International Fishery Association, bonito, which could only grow to a maximum of 40 to 50 centimeters, was currently sold internationally for $1,600 per ton, which was equivalent to $1.6 per kilogram. Naturally, Zhang Hai would not raise this kind of fish. Therefore, he only raised big tuna, which was not considered a bonito. Its scientific name was albacore tuna, which could grow to a maximum of about 1.5 meters. It was considered small in the tuna family, but the price of this thing was very high. In China, good quality fish can be sold for about 200 renminbi per catty, which is 400 renminbi per catty. Converted to US dollars, it's about $60. Zhang Hai's fish is estimated to be sold at a wholesale price of $100 per catty, which is very reasonable. Chapter 957. After looking at the two kinds of fry, Zhang Hai nodded. Overall, he was very satisfied with these two things. That's it, let's talk about the price of these two kinds of fish. Zhang Hai looked at Antoine and said with a smile. He is going to use these two kinds of fish to replace the American redfish. The remaining grouper, longhead, and Atlantic salmon will still be farmed, and he will also increase the number of lobsters, spotted shrimp, and king crab. At the same time, Zhang Hai is also going to sell some geoduck clams. He wants to raise anything that makes money. This is not urgent. Because the long-finned golden gun can't be bred normally, there is no way to guarantee the quantity, but I also got some fry here. Mr. Zhang, you may be interested. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Antoine also smiled and said to him, he is telling the truth. White pomfret and American redfish are worthless and it is easy to breed them. But tuna, which have been swimming all their lives, will not stop because their gills have degenerated. So breeding this kind of fish is possible, but it is really difficult, so there is no way to guarantee the quantity. For example, there are 100,000 fry in the white pomfret's net cage. These fry are still very happy, but there are only 2,000 on the long-finned golden gun side, and more than a dozen have died in the past few days because the range of activity of these fish is too large. In order to make up for this defect, he specially got some more expensive fish species to show to Zhang Hai. Oh, let's take a look. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai raised his eyebrows and then walked over and said. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Antoine also took him to the front of several net cages at the back. Still using electric equipment, he pulled up the underwater net cage, and then a small fry appeared in front of Zhang Hai. This is. Looking at this kind of unfamiliar fry, Zhang Hai asked with some doubts. This is silver codfish. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Antoine didn't speak yet, but Edward Anderson spoke first. Silver cod? Is this a codfish? Zhang Hai asked doubtfully as he looked at the long little things in front of him. Although this thing is called a silver codfish, it's not a codfish, but a scorpion fish. This fish is a species of the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean. It's mainly supplied to Soviet Russia and Japan. I heard that this thing is selling well in Mr. Zhang's home country recently. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Antoine said with a smile. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also looked at these fishes, then a thought flashed in his mind. He seemed to have seen this thing in Japanese cartoons before. So he immediately took out his mobile phone and sent a WeChat message to Chi Li, asking her if she knew this kind of fish. Soon Chi Li sent him a message. She does know this kind of fish. This kind of fish is a precious species in China. Codfish is codfish. Silver codfish is silver codfish. Although there is a difference of one word, the difference is not small. If this kind of fish is retailed, the price is more than 110 renminbi. The wholesale price is more than 80 to 90 renminbi per catty, which is about $35 per catty. Hearing this figure, Zhang Hai nodded. It's indeed not cheap. He can also sell this fish for $60 per catty, because other places catch this kind of fish, but he can raise this kind of fish. Can this be supplied in sufficient quantity? Pointing to the silver codfish, Zhang Hai said to Antoine. Of course, this is not a problem. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Antoine patted his chest and said, this kind of fish has been raised in Asia, but this kind of fish lives about 2,000 meters under the sea, so there is no way to use net cages to raise it. That is to say, it is possible to raise it, but it is impossible to raise it in batches, so even if this kind of fish is raised, it is sold as wild. But he has already contacted a plant, so there will be no problem in quantity. As for the quality, there will be no problem. There is also this kind of fish, humpback bass. I heard that this kind of fish is also very popular in Huaxia. Seeing that Zhang Hai is very satisfied with this kind of fish, Antoine also smiled, and then picked up another net cage, in which there is a kind of small white fish with black spots. Looking at this fish, Zhang Hai became interested, because he knows this fish. Its scientific name is humpback bass, and its nickname is mouse spot. Yes, in Hong Kong movies there are many seafood restaurants and the like, and the best thing is this fish. So he immediately took a photo and asked Chile. Edward Anderson knows a lot, but he is also a little confused about how much these precious seafood can be sold for. After all, he has not been exposed to these before. The most popular fish in the West is codfish. It is nutritious and the price is fair. In fact, the luxury fish market is basically brought from Asia. Westerners don't eat much fish. Look at many Western restaurants, they only have codfish as a fish meal. It is just divided into ordinary codfish, haddock, Pacific codfish, and so on. If you go to some Chinese restaurants, you will find out the price of fish, including tuna. This kind of thing used to be eaten in the Atlantic Ocean. These are all things that show one's bravery, such as going out to sea alone and catching a tuna or something to prove oneself as a successful fisherman. In modern times, this kind of fish became popular in Japan, which was the world's second largest economy. Even now, the biggest market for this kind of fish is still Japan's sushi restaurants. Not long after, Chile sent another message. Humpback bass, also known as mouse spot, is also very popular. In some domestic hotels, the selling price is 980 yuan per catty. Of course, this is only the selling price in domestic hotels, and the price has dropped in recent years. Just now, Chile asked her purchasing department, and the price of mouse spot is 260 yuan per catty, which is equivalent to 520 yuan per catty. Hearing Chile's price, Zhang Hai calculated in his heart. He has always been a profiteer. Although the price is close to $100 per catty, Zhang Hai calculated that the price will be $140 per catty with an increase of 40%. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai's eyes lit up. Purely based on the unit price, this kind of fish is probably the most valuable in his fishery at present. Seeing that Zhang Hai is very satisfied with this kind of fish, Antoine pulled up the fishing net next to him. This is haddock. There is no need to introduce it. We are very familiar with it. Looking at the new net cage, it is not difficult for Zhang Hai to see what kind of fish is in the net cage. Haddock is the noblest among cod, but even if this kind of fish is sold, it will not be sold at a very high price. Because there is no live fish for this kind of fish. Once it is on the boat, its head will be cut off. In the United States, the retail price is about $10 per pound. Of course, this refers to fresh fish, not frozen fish. Even if Zhang Hai sells it as fresh, it will probably be the same as the red fish in the United States, which is $40 per catty. Therefore, even if Zhang Hai wants to raise this kind of fish, he does not plan to raise a lot. No. I naturally know that this kind of fish is not good enough for you, so I am not going to introduce this kind of fish to Mr. Zhang. I want to introduce this kind of fish. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Antoine immediately shook his head and pointed to a small net cage next to the haddock. It is a very small net cage. Looking at the fish in the net cage, Zhang Hai can't help but be a little surprised. This kind of fish had a slender body. Although it was only a seedling, it could be seen that once this fish grew up, it would belong to the slender type. The color of this fish was a bit too bright. It was actually red with a slight pinkish color. This is the eastern star spot? Looking at this kind of fish, Zhang Hai can't help but secretly click his tongue. He knows this kind of fish. To be exact, he has eaten it before. He has eaten this kind of fish once when he was on a mission in the capital. To be honest, the taste of this fish is average. It is not particularly good, but it is definitely not bad. However, in Zhang Hai's opinion, the taste of this fish is a little worse than his long zhu. Especially after knowing that this kind of fish is called the eastern star spot, Zhang Hai muttered in his heart, "Eastern star spot, is there a Hong star spot?" This name is probably given by the people in Hong Kong. But even so, no one can raise the price of this thing. Zhang Hai once quietly asked. This kind of fish is pure and wild, produced in the Dongsha archipelago of Huaxia. It is more than 800 yuan per catty. The second-class magenta fish with black in it is called Audong. It is more than 700 yuan per catty. The third-class magenta fish is slightly pink. Even if it is artificially farmed, it is also about 600 yuan per catty. Now the fry in front of Zhang Hai are naturally artificially farmed, but Zhang Hai is confident that he can raise it into the wild. In that case, the price of this kind of fish is 800 yuan per catty. 1 kilogram is 1,600 yuan, which is more than 200 yuan per US dollar, close to 300 yuan per US dollar. Then I will sell it for 300 yuan. 300 yuan per catty fish. After thinking about it, Zhang Hai can't help but take a deep breath. 300 yuan per catty. Under Zhang Hai's cultivation, this fish can grow to 1 kilogram in a year. If he buys 1 million fish, it will be 1 million kilograms. That is to say, it is worth 300 million yuan? What if it is 10 million? 3 billion yuan? Thinking of this, Zhang Hai's eyebrows unconsciously twitched. It seems that, maybe, he suddenly lost interest in the bluefin tuna. Bluefin tuna, this thing, it takes a few years to grow to a particularly large size. If I have this time to raise the eastern star spot, maybe, I can earn more than raising bluefin tuna. What's more, he has no place to buy bluefin fry. He can only rely on the bluefin tunas in his own fish farm to slowly reproduce. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai's eyes narrowed. He had to make a good calculation. Originally, he was only going to buy some white pomfret and golden longfin spears. But now, he was a little shaken. Chapter 958. After seeing so many fish, to be honest, Zhang Hai was very tempted. It was impossible for him to say that he didn't want these things. But the problem was that he could ask for them. But how much was a problem? Perhaps for others, these things couldn't be raised casually. After all, the water quality, the size of the fish, the distribution, and so on had to be considered. But Zhang Hai didn't need to do these things. What he needed to do was to simply put these fish into the sea, as long as the density wasn't too high. So after looking at Edward Anderson, Zhang Hai whispered to him. Indeed, this was a very troublesome thing, but fortunately, Edward Anderson was still quite experienced. According to the current distribution and number of fish in our fish farm, if we buy fry, the upper limit should be 12 million big fish and 80 million small fish. You can figure out the specifics. After thinking for a while, Edward Anderson said to Zhang Hai. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also thought about it. The so-called big fish were fish that could grow more than 1 meter long, such as the longfin tuna and the dragonfly. If Zhang Hai wanted to raise codfish, this thing would also be a big fish. As for the other fish, they were all small fish. After all, whether it was the eastern star spot, the white pomfret, the silver snowfish, or the rat spot, these fish could only grow 1 kilogram at most, 2 kilograms at most. Such fish were naturally small fish in the sea. After all, even the Atlantic codfish could grow 200 kilograms in weight and more than 2 meters long, not to mention the more muscular tuna. 12 million big fish and 80 million small fish. Well, iron bull. After calculating in his heart, this was the upper limit that the fish farm could bear. Naturally, Zhang Hai couldn't buy fish according to the upper limit, so after thinking about it, he could raise fish according to 3/4 saturation. So after planning, Zhang Hai looked at Antoine. Hearing that Zhang Hai was almost done with his plan, Antoine asked Zhang Hai with a smile, "Hey Mr. Zhang, tell me. I want 4 million longfin tuna this year, 2 million longfin tuna, and 2 million Atlantic salmon. Do you have any way to get other tuna species? Looking at Antoine in front of him, Zhang Hai decided on the big fish first. It's probably a bit difficult. You also know that this kind of thing swims around. There are only a few tuna farms in the world. Even if there are, it is estimated that there won't be many. After thinking about it, Antoine thought about it and said to Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai thought for a moment after listening to Antoine's words. These were all things that he needed. Get whatever you can. Blackfin is fine. Of course, the best would be yellowfin, big eye, masu, and chingon. Southern bluefin would be good too. If you can really get it, I will give you the upper limit of 1 million fish, and you can do whatever you want with the rest. Looking at Antoine, Zhang Hai said seriously, and Antoine thought for a moment and gritted his teeth. Tuna is extremely expensive even if they are sold as fry. Other fry are sold by the ton, such as cod fry and the like, but tuna fry are sold by the tail. One tail is $6, and 1 million is $6 million. He can get at least $500,000 from this. No one will refuse money, right? So he nodded to show that he understood. Zhang Hai then turned his attention to the little fish. The growth time of tuna was very slow. It would take almost 5 years for them to mature. Even if Zhang Hai's fishing ground was nourished with spiritual energy, it would still be the same. His spiritual energy could only make these animals grow bigger, but it couldn't make them reach the mature stage directly. Therefore, these 5 years were a must. But after raising them, a long-fin tuna weighs almost 40 kilograms. Zhang Hai sells them for $100 per kilogram, and one fish is $40,000. 4 million fish is $40 billion. Of course, this money has to be spread evenly over 5 years, but even so, these fish are worth nearly $8 billion a year. It is not an exaggeration to say that it is a huge sum of money. And the most important thing is that he raises them every year, and only in the first 5 years there will be no harvest. After 5 years, his fish will be endless. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai's heart was still a little excited. With the addition of longzhu and salmon, these fish will be harvested every year, and Zhang Hai's fishery will only become stronger and stronger. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Edward Anderson's hand couldn't help but tremble. Zhang Hai calculated the price, and so did he. If Zhang Hai really raises these fish, the annual income will be more than $50 billion after 5 years. 2,000 is $100 million, and $100 million will be divided among the 8 of them. Gulp. Just thinking about it, he felt his throat tighten. It's too scary. And this is just the big fish. What about the small fish? These small fish, 80 million. Well, let's get the white pomfret first. We'll be more assured about that. 30 million white pomfret, 10 million silver cod, 10 million rat spots, and 10 million eastern star spots. That's it. After thinking for a while, Zhang Hai waved his hand. It's better to try to raise them first, because these fish are not fish species of the Atlantic Ocean, but of the Pacific Ocean. Zhang Hai actually wasn't too sure whether they would be suitable for his place. Okay, no problem. I'll definitely pick the best for you. I'll give you another 2 million haddock. Hearing Zhang Hai's order, Antoine couldn't help but smile in excitement. He had made a lot of money from this deal. At present, not counting the last 1 million tuna seedlings, just the ones ordered by Zhang Hai. A fry of albacore tuna was $6, a tail of anchovy was $1.15, and a tail of 4-year-old salmon was $5. These big fish added up to $46.3 million, and Antoine could at least make a small profit out of it. Zhang Hai was a person who never put money on the line. He believed in real gold and silver transactions. Therefore, there was no such thing as empty-handed. If someone came to him to buy beef, he would have beef. So long as they brought the money, he would deliver the goods. What mortgage, what high price after selling the beef? Zhang Hai did not need it. He would not give anyone face, he was just that firm. So when he bought things from others, he would simply give them money. It was that simple. Antoine could pay off his bank loan with the money he earned from these larvae alone. Of course, Americans did not have the habit of paying off their loans in one go. It was more likely that he would use the money to expand his larvae farm. The price of the small fish was actually higher. After all, the fish Zhang Hai wanted were not ordinary fish. The white pomfret was cheap, almost the same price as the American redfish. Because Zhang Hai counted by the tail, Antoine gave him a discount of 18 cents per fish, so 30 million fish was a total of $4 million. However, the other 3 kinds of fish were a little more expensive. He bought the silver cod from Russia, and it sold for $2 per fish. A silver cod could grow to about 1 meter, with a maximum of 120 centimeters. Of course, it was impossible for it to grow to that size, but it could grow to 80 centimeters. At that time, it would weigh more than 10 kilograms. 1 kilogram was $60, so a dozen kilograms would cost nearly $1,000. It was not bad. The mouse spot was similar to the grouper. It could grow up to half a meter long, and 5 kilograms was the limit. Zhang Hai estimated that it wouldn't be a big problem. A fry was $5, the same as a 4-year-old salmon. However, Zhang Hai could raise about 3 kilograms a year. 1 kilogram of Zhang Hai was $140, so 3 kilograms would be $420. If one fish was already so expensive, what else was there to say? 10 million fish would be $2 billion. The money from these fish alone was equivalent to 2/3 of the total income of Zhang Hai's fish farm this year. The eastern star spot was a little more expensive. Although they were farmed ones, even the small seedlings of this fish cost $15 per tail. Of course, this price included the shipping cost. Otherwise, the fish wouldn't be sold at such a high price. The white pomfret was $4 million, the mouse spot was $50 million, and the eastern star spot was $150 million. The price of $15 per fish was indeed a bit high. The small fish were worth a total of $254 million, and the big fish were worth more than $25,000. Zhang Zian calculated in his heart. Fortunately, he didn't have to pay all this money in one go. Otherwise, he would feel a little heartache. After he paid the deposit and signed the contract, the price of the fish was almost settled. Then, Zhang Hai prepared to get some shrimp, lobsters, and king crabs. There was no market for abalones and sea cucumbers in the United States. Zhang Hai couldn't even finish these things in the sea, so there was no need to farm them. By the way, Mr. Zhang, I heard that you like shrimps. Are you interested in these shrimps? As soon as he mentioned these shellfish, Antoine suddenly patted his head and asked Zhang Hai excitedly. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai looked at him with some confusion. He opened 2 specially heated net boxes in the distance and fished out 2 things from them. Zhang Hai knew these 2 things. They were big shrimps and shrimp crawlers, which were also mantis shrimps. But the question was, why were these 2 things so big? In Zhang Hai's opinion, the biggest shrimps in the past, besides lobsters, were the Argentinian red shrimps that appeared inexplicably in his manner. But compared with the big shrimps and mantis shrimps in front of him, the Argentinian red shrimps were nothing. Because at this time, the 2 things in front of him were almost half a meter long, almost as long as his forearm. Were they shrimps? Are you sure he didn't eat some radioactive substance and mutated? Were they kidding? Mr. Zhang, are you interested in these 2 things? Looking at Zhang Hai's dazed appearance, Antoine couldn't help but laugh. To be honest, when he first saw the 2 giant beasts, he was also stunned. Then he had a feeling that Zhang Hai would be interested. Gulp. Tell me. Looking at the 2 things in front of him, Zhang Hai swallowed a mouthful of saliva and whispered. Chapter 959. How do we eat this prawn? Looking at the several big prawns in the basin, Chia couldn't help but scratch her head and whisper to Zhang Hai, who was sitting next to her. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai also smacked his lips. To be honest, he didn't know. Because the prawn in front of him seemed to be a bit too big. I think we should just cook it and eat it directly. Seeing Zhang Hai and Qi Jie's somewhat troublesome look, Qi Jie, who was sitting next to them, couldn't help but say indifferently. Hearing what she said, many people who felt a little troublesome nodded their heads. But if we cook it directly, it feels a bit wasteful. But it's not that no one objected, at least after Ai Xiaoxi thought about it, she said to her. After hearing Ai Xiaoxi's words, Zhang Hai also nodded. Cooking it is indeed a bit wasteful. How about this? Let's boil 2 prawns, steam 2 prawns with minced garlic, and roast 2 prawns. Listening to different opinions, Chia thought for a moment and said with a smile. Since they haven't decided how to cook it, then let's try it out. Hey, I think this is reliable. Hearing Chia's words, Feng Yunchen also smacked her palm and said with a smile. Okay, then let's do it. After seeing that there was an opinion, Aphrodite also smiled and picked up the basin in front of her and walked towards the kitchen, and Zhang Hai and the others also walked over, wanting to see if this thing is easy to cook. The thing that Zhang Hai brought back is not someone else. It is a prawn, a big prawn, but how big is this prawn? Not counting the pincers, it is 40 centimeters long. Indeed, this is a very scary prawn. If it is straightened, it is not even shorter than a human forearm. This kind of prawn was called lobster, and it was the largest known prawn. Antoine knew that Zhang Hai liked to eat prawns, so when he was looking for seafood, he also found prawns. He happened to see this thing, so he took it. Another monster was a giant mantis prawn, which came from the same place as the luo prawn. However, Zhang Hai wasn't interested in mantis prawns, but he brought back a dozen of them. Of course, since Zhang Hai gave Antoine such a big business deal, he couldn't ask Zhang Hai for money for just a dozen of prawns. However, if Zhang Hai wanted to plant prawns, he would have to pay. According to Antoine's introduction, these prawns came from Thailand. In fact, it wasn't only Thailand, but other countries also had them. The Indian Ocean was a very mysterious place. There were 7 continents and 4 oceans in the world. Not many people lived in the Arctic Ocean, but not many people knew about the Indian Ocean. But if you were a real foodie, you would know that if you wanted to eat seafood, you had to eat the Indian Ocean. One of the reasons was that the pollution in the Indian Ocean should be the lightest. Of course, it was very heavy now. But compared to the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, it was considered light. In the Pacific Ocean, countries like the west coast of the United States, Huaxia, Soviet Russia, Japan, and Australia had started to pollute the sea many years ago. The Atlantic Ocean was the source of the European starting point. Now, when they went to other countries, they would say that the air here was good, the environment here was good, and so on. However, these countries came from the industrial era, just like Huaxia. When they started to develop their economy, infrastructure, and industrial construction, it was impossible for there to be no pollution. The Atlantic Ocean was the most polluted sea. Now, many parts of the Atlantic Ocean were underwater with natural gas pipelines and oil drilling platforms. It would be strange if the pollution was small. But now, they did not need to develop these vigorously, so they talked about environmental protection every day. As for the Indian Ocean, to be honest, there were no big countries around it. The only big country was India. The Ganges River was seriously polluted, but it was difficult for India alone to pollute the entire sea, not to mention that the country's heavy industry wasn't good enough. At the same time, the most important thing was that some of the countries along the Indian Ocean were basically tourism-oriented. For example, the famous Maldives and Sri Lanka were here. In terms of scenery, this place was not worse than the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. Secondly, this ocean, the entire sea, was almost on the equator. It was known that the warmer the place, the faster the growth of seafood. This was because they did not need to survive the winter and could grow all year round. At the same time, there were not many predatory fish here. At the same time, the most important thing was that the Indian Ocean was not peaceful. Everyone knew the reason. Many countries were making trouble there. In some places, everyone was a pirate. Everywhere, there were men who wanted to be the pirate king. Which fishing boat dared to go there? Basically, fishing was done on the coast. Not many people dared to go inside. Therefore, without human interference, the seafood in the Indian Ocean was especially delicious. Therefore, real foodies would pick the seafood in the Indian Ocean to eat. This was inevitable. Zhang Hai liked to eat prawns. This was probably his favorite seafood. Therefore, if this prawn tasted good, it would not prevent him from breeding it. After all, this was a big prawn more than 40 centimeters long. If he sold it back to China, TSK. Speaking of which, there was a story behind Zhang Hai's love of prawns. It was mainly about when Zhang Hai was young, his family was not very well off. Therefore, he did not eat prawns when he was very young. It was not until he was in the 3rd grade of primary school that he ate prawns at his grandfather's house during the New Year. At that time, it was still ice prawns. At that time, he felt that it was so delicious. Later on, when the family's financial situation was better, his father would also buy him some prawns to eat during festivals. At first, it was boiled, but later on, he started to fry it first and then spray it with sweet and sour sauce. He called it relying on big prawns. Zhang Hai had always liked to eat prawns. However, after his parents passed away, Zhang Hai had not eaten prawns for a while. Later, after he had his own territory, although Zhang Hai had eaten a lot of wild animals in the mountains, cattle and sheep on land, and seafood in the sea, he still had a special liking for prawns. Not long after, Xueqi had finished cooking the prawns. Zhang Hai's favorite dish could not be made with just prawns because they were too big. They could only be boiled, steamed with minced garlic, and roasted. After the 6 prawns were placed on the table, because it wasn't dinner time yet, everyone gathered around and shared the food. After eating, Zhang Hai also nodded. The biggest special thing about this prawn was that it was very refreshing. When he bit into it, it was all prawn meat. It was very delicious, but in terms of taste, well, it could only be regarded as not bad. After all, it was bred in the temperate zone, so the meat was not too sweet. Compared with the Arctic sweet prawn, the meat was slightly thicker, but finer than the lobster. It tasted good. Zhang Hai also nodded and decided to raise some prawns. Raising prawns was not like raising fish. He still had to buy fry and take care of them. In Zhang Hai's fishing ground, seaweed had long been spread, so when the young prawns entered the water, they could eat and live on their own. The most important thing was that prawns should grow fast. Generally, for the green prawns and white prawns bought outside, the fastest could be put on the market in 60 days, and the slowest could be put on the market in more than 100 days. Although the Russian prawns could not be put on the market like these prawns, when they were bought, they were 2 months old. After 3 months, they could grow to 30 grams in 5 months. Then it was like blowing air. Basically, after more than a year, they could grow almost fully. Not to mention, Zhang Hai's sea was full of spiritual energy. So there was no need to worry about this. When Antoine came to deliver fish food, he could ask him to help buy a few tons of prawn fry. Yes, Zhang Hai bought so many fish this year, and he must also put bait, which was cuttlefish and octopus fry. These things were much better than feed. Zhang Hai's fish ate these wild things. What's more, when these baits grew up, they tasted very good. Zhang Hai used to like to eat teppanyaki squid. Now, he ate it casually. The first batch of squid he raised, although the type was small, had been nourished by spiritual energy. Now, the squid in Zhang Hai's manor was not much smaller than the prawns. If their whiskers were not straightened, they would be about 40 centimeters long. Just as Zhang Hai was eating and thinking, his phone suddenly rang. He picked it up and saw that the caller was none other than Moses Adams. This guy had not appeared for a while. The last time he appeared, he was in Washington. This time, he called him at this time. It was obvious that he did not come to greet him. "Hello, Moses, what's the matter?" Based on Zhang Hai's familiarity with him naturally, there was no need to call him by his full name. But Zhang Hai felt a little uncomfortable just calling his name, because it was like a call from a Japanese. "Hi, Zhang, I just received an invitation here, so I'm calling to ask you." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Moses Adams also said with a smile. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai was stunned for a moment. Why did he invite him? Are you confused? Your invitation? Why are you asking me? He asked doubtfully on the other side of the phone. Oh, I didn't make it clear. I received an invitation from the San Antonio City Council. They invited you to participate in their livestock show. Didn't you go there last year to slap their faces? Now you've beaten these Texans into submission. They're still holding it this year, so they specifically asked you if you'd like to go. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Moses Adams also said. Chapter 960. San Antonio Livestock Show? Hearing Moses Adams' words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Why did the livestock show want to see him? Zhang Hai remembered that in April last year, he went to the American Livestock Show. As a result, he came back after slapping everyone's faces. He didn't even have a good time. Now the government was looking for him? What the hell was this? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Moses Adams also laughed, and then explained to Zhang Hai. Yes, they are looking for you. Although you slapped everyone's faces last year, after all, your cattle also became famous, and you also helped the show become famous. These people are just the people in charge of the show. They don't care who gets first place, who slaps whose faces, they only care about who can help them make more money. If there was a country's business world that was the most unsympathetic, it would be the American business world. American businessmen often called it a game, a crocodile game. What kind of crocodile game was this? Because in the business world, they didn't believe in tears or friendship. They only cared about who was bigger. When crocodiles were hunting, they would cry first. This was called the most hypocritical tears in the West. In the past, Westerners thought that crocodiles were moved by the people they ate before eating people. Later, it was confirmed that crocodiles really didn't cry. They only shed tears to lubricate their eyes and enter the hunting state. So if you saw a crocodile crying, you had to be careful, because it meant that it was ready to hunt. Crocodiles, as cold-blooded animals, weren't smart and didn't feel moved. Crocodiles were like snakes, they couldn't be tamed. Because they didn't have any emotions in their minds, they wouldn't be moved, they wouldn't be afraid, they wouldn't be scared, and they wouldn't have things like friendship and friendship. In the Western business world, only one thing mattered was whether you were rich enough. Zhang Hai slapped everyone's faces last year. Zhang Hai offended the local cowboy group last year. But so what? As long as Zhang Hai's cattle were in the exhibition, after a year of fermentation, needless to say, it would definitely attract a lot of attention. If people came to buy tickets to watch the show, it meant that there was money to be made. If there was traffic, it would attract advertisers, and the organization would make money. This was the simplest thing. So this year, San Antonio sent an invitation to Zhang Hai again. No one knew that Zhang Hai wouldn't be invited to the National Beef Show in April, but they were very interested in the San Antonio Beef Show. In fact, if it was really in April, Zhang Hai probably wouldn't be able to go. Because this April, Zhang Hai was very busy, not because of anything else, but because of the harvest of Yangtze River grenadier fish. At that time, his first batch of grenadier fish would enter the Huaxia market. As for how much he would sell it to the rich, let's not talk about that. Whether it was in Huaxia or the United States, Zhang Hai had always sold things in a bad way, because he knew that the people who ate his food were not ordinary people, and few ordinary people could afford it. No one was willing to spend half a month, or even several months' salary to eat Zhang Hai's seafood or beef, so Zhang Hai didn't feel guilty about selling it. Well, the livestock show. Touching his chin, Zhang Hai whispered, "Should I go or not?" This was a problem. Ahem. It's just my feeling. If you don't have anything to do, you can go and have some fun. Hearing Zhang Hai's hesitant voice, Moses Adams on the other side of the phone said to Zhang Hai, "Well, what do you mean?" Hearing his words, Zhang Hai looked at him with some doubts. "The main thing is, your main business is selling beef cattle and pasture. It's very troublesome to attend beef cattle shows often, because I know you don't lack buyers, but it's also necessary to attend it once a year to make a name for yourself. You can't let your pasture and beef cattle fade out of the eyes of others. The most terrible thing is to get used to it. Just like Japan's Wagyu, once they appeared, they would sweep through all the major livestock shows. As a result, people were not used to it at first, but after a few years, they got used to it. They all know that their beef is good and the beef is expensive. They will even classify Wagyu as the same grade. Although your manor doesn't have a unique breed of beef cattle, if you can let people get used to it, if you raise the price in the future, or if there are any accidents, the tolerance of the masses will also become stronger." Hearing Zhang Hai's question, Moses Adams also said seriously. Of course, the reason why he recommended Zhang Hai so hard was mainly because of the above. Another reason was that he had also received benefits from the organizers. Now he was the legal representative of the San Antonio Livestock Show. In these 3 weeks, it was estimated that he would make $1 million or $800,000. Well, I'll discuss this with Robbins Garcia first, and then I'll give you an answer. After thinking about it, Moses Adams was right. He couldn't always be mysterious. After all, he had started to sell pasture. However, he still couldn't guarantee that he would attend the show. He still had to ask the professionals, and the most professional cattle farmers in his manor were naturally people like Robbins Garcia and Burke Dollar. "Okay, I'll wait for your reply." In fact, after hearing Zhang Hai's words, Moses Adams already knew that it was most likely going to happen. He had known Zhang Hai for more than 3 years. This guy was famous for being stubborn. As long as he was willing to consider something, it meant that there was a 90% chance that it would happen. He didn't even want to listen to anything. Even if you gave him money, he wouldn't even look at it. As the old saying went, Listen to others and you will eat your fill. However, Zhang Hai hated it when others tried to persuade him. What's wrong? You're leaving again? After hanging up the phone, Qi Jie looked at Zhang Hai and said unhappily. Zhang Hai had just returned for a few days, and now he was leaving again? Although she and Zhang Hai weren't newlyweds, they could be considered as an old couple. However, she still liked to be around Zhang Hai all day long, and didn't want Zhang Hai to go on business trips often. I'll do some research. Hearing Qi Jie's jealous words, Zhang Hai smiled awkwardly. His original idea of going also dissipated a lot in an instant. It was said that a woman's home was a hero's grave. Zhang Hai was not a hero, but he couldn't bear it either. Indeed, he was also a little uninterested in going to a place that he didn't like very much. Moses Adams really knew Zhang Hai very well. When Zhang Hai said that he wanted to do some research, he had almost agreed in his heart. However, he didn't think about the problem of Zhang Hai's woman. Hearing Zhang Hai say that he wanted to do some research, Qi Jie wrinkled her nose at him and then went to deal with the prawns. In fact, in her opinion, the prawns tasted pretty good. Zhang Hai thought about it, washed his hands, and went to find Robbins Garcia. Indeed, he didn't really want to go now, but as said just now, the best thing about Zhang Hai was that professional things were left to professionals. Since he thought that this matter was beneficial to him, then he had to ask Robbins Garcia's opinion. If he strongly recommended him to go, Qi Jie couldn't stop him. Of course, she just said it, and she didn't necessarily want to stop him. Boss, you're looking for me? After leaving the house, Zhang Hai stepped on the path from the door to the cowshed and quickly walked to the cowshed. From afar, he saw Robbins Garcia, Burke Dollar, Philemon Turner, Harriman Fells, Belle Lester, Blake Hill, and Edie Lewis busy there, driving the cattle dogs that Zhang Hai bought back then. They ran around and kept the cattle in a small area. Zhang Hai's little Huang and Xiaobai were also there, but little Huang was not interested in driving the cattle. In Zhang Hai's manner, little Huang's status was superior, but Xiaobai was very addicted to commanding the cattle dogs. When he saw Zhang Hai from afar and waved at him, Robbins Garcia, who was commanding, also rode over on a horse. It's like this. San Antonio found Moses Adams and invited us to participate in the San Antonio Beef Show. What do you think? Zhang Hai and Robbins Garcia were familiar enough, so he didn't need to be polite and asked him directly. San Antonio Beef Show? Why did they invite us? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia looked at him with some doubts. In his opinion, Zhang Hai had offended almost all the cowboys in San Antonio. These people now invited Zhang Hai to participate in the show. Is there any conspiracy? And Moses Adams is also involved in this? Don't be so careful. It's not that these guys are looking for trouble with me, but because our meat is now quite famous in the United States, so these guys want to use our name to swindle people. With our beef cattle, it will definitely attract a lot of people so they can sell advertisements and make money. Also, I think Moses Adams is right about something. We definitely have to attend an animal husbandry exhibition every year, not to make a name for ourselves, but to let everyone know that the world's #1 beef cattle is ours. We have to let them get used to our existence. Just like Wagyu. We have to let our cattle, our brand, stand there, and they will know that we are not on the same level as them. Looking at Robbins Garcia, Zhang Hai also repeated Moses Adams's words. Of course, he also added his own understanding. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia was stunned. He didn't have such thoughts in the past. But he thought about it and realized that what Zhang Hai said was not unreasonable. Chapter 961. To be honest, this reason is really good, but I don't recommend you go. Otherwise, let me bring a few people. After thinking for a while, Robbins Garcia looked at Zhang Hai and said, from his point of view, Zhang Hai would not be of much use to the team other than his soul. To be honest, Zhang Hai himself was useless. He did not know how to take care of the cows, nor did he know how to feed them. He was also not on good terms with the organizers. To be honest, Robbins Garcia asked Zhang Hai to participate in the first place. First, it was to let Zhang Hai relax. Second, if there was any business, Zhang Hai would have to go and discuss it. He was the boss, and everything had to be decided by him. Robbins Garcia and Edward Anderson were particularly good at this point. They didn't want to command Zhang Hai casually just because they knew the industry. They would always give their opinions, whether or not to sell it, whether or not to buy it, and how much it would cost. It was all up to Zhang Hai. Since they knew that Zhang Hai might be in some trouble, there was no need to let Zhang Hai go. For them, Zhang Hai's safety was the most important issue. There was no other issue. Therefore, when Zhang Hai said this, he shook his head and said seriously. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also thought about it. Indeed, he would not be of much help. The main thing was to get a general direction. However, Zhang Hai and the others did not need to make a name for themselves. Secondly, they did not need to sell beef. Therefore, it was fine to send Robbins Garcia. However, Zhang Hai had never sent them alone before, so he could not make up his mind. Don't worry, there won't be a problem. Have you forgotten that Dulles Gerard and the others have also been to Europe to sell red wine? Looking at Zhang Hai's hesitant eyes, Robbins Garcia smiled and said. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also nodded. This was a good thing. In the future, he would not have to do everything by himself. After all, Zhang Hai was very lazy. Okay, in that case you will personally lead the team. You can choose the people and cows. After thinking for a while, Zhang Hai said seriously. Hearing that Zhang Hai had decided to trust him, Robbins Garcia also smiled. This was a good thing for him. If he could do things well this time, it would undoubtedly be a bonus to Zhang Hai. A few days ago, after Edward Anderson came back, he also told him about Zhang Hai's purchase of fish seedlings. If there were no accidents, the total income of the fishermen would exceed 100 million in a few years. Of course, it was not referring to Zhang Hai's income, but the income of the fishermen. Therefore, before that, he had to show his loyalty to Zhang Hai. He could not leave the land side behind. Of course, Zhang Hai had already told him that the money from selling grass would be counted as the cowboy's commission. However, when it was time to show his loyalty, he would not give up. Hearing that Zhang Hai allowed him to go, he also patted his chest, indicating that Zhang Hai could rest assured. Then he went to find Burkdollar and the others. This time, he would lead the team alone, so Burkdollar, the big cowboy, would be in charge of the rest of the cowboys after he left. Now, there were some tasks that needed to be handed over. Seeing that Burkdollar was busy, Zhang Hai also went to the stable in the distance. His little Xia had now become de Xia. Seeing that Zhang Hai had come, the giant horse happily raised its front hooves, but when its front hooves fell, the sound was indeed a little frightening. Looking at the giant horse, Zhang Hai also smiled, then went over and patted its head. We just met this morning, and you miss me so soon. Seeing the horse snorting and lowering its head, Zhang Hai also said with a smile. Let's go, I'll take you out to play. Seeing little Xia sticking to him, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile. Then he opened the stable and took out the giant horse. Then he went to the side and pulled out the saddle and dragon head. Little Xia was very sensible. He stood in place and let Zhang Hai do these things for him. When everything was done, Zhang Hai flipped his body onto the horse's back. With his legs clamped, little Xia began to run briskly around the field. Little Xia was very smart. He stood there and let Zhang Hai do these things for him. Thinking back, when Zhang Hai first saw little Xia, it should be 2 years ago when he had just bought the cow. At that time, little Xia was still a mixed-race pony. It was not good-looking, but its skeleton was very big. When Zhang Hai bought it, it was still a little irritable, but with the nourishment of spiritual energy, its spiritual wisdom was also opened. With more than 2 years of growth, little Xia's current physique had reached the level of its ancestors. With that huge figure, even Zhang Hai would feel a little too tall every time he rode it. The other horses were shorter than it by more than a head. Now, little Xia was the horse king of this herd. In the past, Shire horses had a problem. Because they were too heavy, the horse's bones could not bear the weight of the horse itself. Therefore, ordinary Shire horses might not even be able to trot, let alone run fast. However, Zhang Hai's little Xia did not have such a problem. Its size was not small, but it could still run. Although its running speed was much slower than other horses, at least it could run. Trotting and even jumping was not a problem. Perhaps it was because Zhang Hai kept it in the stable all day long, so Zhang Hai provided it with quite a lot of spiritual energy. Riding little Xia around the manor, Zhang Hai deliberately went to the greenhouse he built and took out some carrots. He washed them and gave them to little Xia to eat. The greenhouse built by Zhang Hai was really convenient. This way, they would have fresh vegetables to eat in the winter. However, everyone knew that the vegetables in the greenhouse did not taste very good. However, Zhang Hai had spiritual energy. When his vegetable seeds were soaked, he would inject spiritual energy into them. Although it was not a lot, at least it allowed the vegetables to grow perfectly and nourish the soil. In addition, Zhang Hai did not use pesticides or fertilizers. They directly put in chickens and wyverns to prevent insects. Although some of the vegetables would spoil, Zhang Hai did not use pesticides or the like. After Prawalton came to Zhang Hai to eat the vegetables here, he also wanted to import Zhang Hai's vegetables. However, Zhang Hai did not agree. What a joke! How much was the price of selling beef and vegetables? Although vegetables were more expensive than ordinary beef, vegetables could not be sold for hundreds of dollars per kilogram. Therefore, in this case, Zhang Hai could enjoy himself. After feeding little Xia, Zhang Hai put it back in the stable. Then, he was not in a hurry to go back. Seeing that the vegetables were growing well, Zhang Hai also went to look at his other things. After going to the greenhouse, Zhang Hai looked to the other side. When Zhang Hai came back from China, he brought a lot of things with him. Not only were there long-jawed croakers, large yellow croakers, Chinese bahaba fish, 9 caddies of yellow croakers, chicken, Songjiang fragrant pigs, German donkeys, and Langshan chicken. These were all necessary things on Zhang Hai's table. However, in addition to these things, Zhang Hai also brought a lot of other seeds, such as sand nest radish, rice from the northeast, and saffron from near Shanghai. Yes, there was no mistake. They were indeed from near Shanghai. Zhang Hai should have introduced saffron before. Saffron was actually a matter of translation. The Tibetan region did not produce it. More than 90% of the saffron in Huaxia was produced near Shanghai. Therefore, the best flower balls were also from there. After more than a year of growth, all of these things had actually already grown up. Not to mention the chickens, donkeys, and pigs, Zhang Hai and the others did not plant rice last year because they did not know how to plant it. However, the saffron flower balls and sand nest radish were planted. Sand nest radish was produced in Tianjin and was considered a combination of vegetables and fruits. It was very crispy and had plenty of water, but there was also a problem. That was, the production was not very high. It could not be cooked as a dish, such as stir-frying or stewing. This kind of radish could not be done. It could only be eaten cold or raw. However, this kind of radish was very popular with the people in Zhang Hai's manor. They ate radish in winter and ginger in summer. It kept them healthy all year round. Although Zhang Hai did not like ginger, radish was still pretty good. Therefore, he ate a large radish almost every few days. As for saffron, it was a little troublesome. The people in Zhang Hai's manor were all rough people. There were no meticulous people. This included Aphrodite and the others. They had never planted these things before. This was not something that could be planted just by digging a hole, burying some soil, and counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This thing needed to be divided into balls and stems. It was very expensive. Originally, Zhang Hai made this thing because it was valuable and good for women's health. In the end, it was quite troublesome. In August last year, Zhang Hai and the others directly planted the flower balls that Zhang Hai brought over. At least 2/3 of them were destroyed. But now, it seemed that the effect of spiritual energy was really terrifying. Even if Zhang Hai and the others did not know how to plant it, the 1/3 that survived were now growing very well. They could be harvested around May. If this thing grew well, then Zhang Hai would have to consider whether to get some ginseng or something to plant here. In the past, he often read novels about farming. 100-year-old ginseng was a must-have. Now that his spiritual energy was getting stronger, it was impossible to plant 100-year-old ginseng in the past. But now it was not impossible. After he planted it, he would not sell it. It was not bad to keep it for himself to eat. In this case, in addition to ginseng, he could also plant some cordyceps, dendrobium ironhide, and so on. There were quite a lot of them. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai could not help but feel a little happy. These nourishing things should be very useful. Chapter 962. In the next few days, Zhang Hai and the others were preparing. What were they preparing for? Of course, they were preparing for Robbins Garcia's expedition. After Zhang Hai talked to Robbins Garcia about this, he started preparing for the trip to San Antonio. First, he had to choose the cows and the people. These two were the most important. The cows were the contestants, and the people had to be responsible for them. Because this time, Zhang Hai and the others were just going to win a random championship. Well, it was quite annoying to say that. But this was also the truth. So if they won first place, they had to give others second and third place, right? Otherwise, how boring would it be? Last year, Zhang Hai participated and won the top few. This year, he did not plan to do so again. So this time, the exhibition hall they booked was only a very small one. They sent a total of 2 cows. One of them was the favorite to win the championship, Zhang Hai's Angus cow. It was 1.5 years old, which was the best age. It wasn't as small as a 9-month-old calf, nor was it as old as a 30-month-old A-grade beef. An 18-month-old cow was just right. In addition to this cow, Zhang Hai also brought a short-faced cow. However, this cow wasn't going to participate in the beef cattle selection, but rather the dairy cow selection. Yes, short-faced cows can be used for both meat and milk. Currently, Zhang Hai had 5,000 of these cows in his manor. Naturally, the bulls would be killed for meat, while the cows would be used to raise calves and milk. This cow was more suitable than the Angus cows. To be honest, the Angus cow's milk wasn't good to drink, and the milk they produced wasn't enough. The short-horned cow that Zhang Hai sent this time was already pregnant when he bought it last year. Not long after the purchase, it gave birth to calves in the manor. After the calves were born, it began to produce milk. Not sure if it was because Zhang Hai's pasture was really good, but the amount of milk produced was huge. It was not like the amount of milk produced by a cow that gave birth for the first time. And the milk tasted good. In Zhang Hai's opinion, it was even similar to the Dutch cows. Even Robbins Garcia thought that the milk was very good, and Zhang Hai could produce it. So this time, he sent these 2 cows. The Angus cow was going to win the championship, and this short-horned cow was going to see what grade Zhang Hai's milk was. 2 cows were not very troublesome. So this time, Robbins Garcia was only going to take 2 people. One was Harriman Fells, who Zhang Hai had introduced to him. Harriman Fells was stimulated when he was young, so his brain was not very fast. But he was in good health and was willing to work. In the manor, besides Zhang Hai's women, Harriman Fells and Knerson Peters were the most loyal to Zhang Hai. Because in their eyes, Zhang Hai was not only their benefactor, he gave them jobs, gave them money, gave them a place to live, and gave them dignity. In the past, when Harriman Fells was in the small town, the adults all pitied him. But pity is not the same as love and respect. Pity is pity. It is a kind of charity from top to bottom. I take care of you because I feel sorry for you. It is like seeing a beggar feel sorry for you and giving him some money. Although Harriman Fells did not say it, his self-esteem made him very uncomfortable. So after he could work, he had been working very hard. He did not want others to pity him. He wanted others to treat him as an equal. After entering Zhang Hai's manor, he had these things. Zhang Hai would order him around as if he was ordering others. This might seem inhumane to others, but this was what Harriman Fells wanted to do. Of course, Zhang Hai would not let him do any delicate work. He was more willing to do weeding, cleaning, and so on. In the past few years, the money Zhang Hai had given him was enough to make the American girls ignore his slow thinking. In addition, his good friend, Knerson Peters, was Zhang Hai's bodyguard in name. But to be honest, Zhang Hai's real bodyguards were Azalina and the others. So he really had nothing to do every day. The only thing he could do was to do odd jobs and exercise his body. As roommates, Knerson Peters and Harriman Fells got along quite well. Harriman Fells was now no smaller than Knerson Peters. He was strong and big. Last year, when the new bulls arrived, he subdued a frightened young bull. The bull was brought in as a breeding bull. It was huge. In terms of weight, it was 1,480 kilograms, 1.5 tons. But he could subdue such a guy. It was because of that incident that Robbins Garcia had a direct understanding of his strength. The Angus cattle were small beef cattle, and the short-horned cow was still a cow. With Harriman Fells in charge, there would be no problem. The second one to go with him was called Black Hill. He was a newcomer. As for the people left in the manor, the nominal leader was Burke Dollar, and the deputy was Philemon Turner. Bell Lester, Gladstone Nelson, and Edie Lewis all stayed in the manor. With these 5 people, Robbins Garcia was more at ease. The 2 cows were brought out to live alone for a few days to let them get used to life without a herd. Then Jiang Hai contacted Zheng Jin, who had returned to work, to prepare a plane to transport them directly to San Antonio. The livestock exhibition in San Antonio lasted for a total of 3 weeks, but it did not mean that Robbins Garcia had to stay there for 3 weeks. There were many activities in these 3 weeks, such as the street cattle herding activities, which seemed to be learned from Spain. There were also cowboy competitions, cowboy bull riding competitions, saddle-less riding competitions, cattle throwing competitions, and so on. There were also many bands that would hold concerts during this period, mainly singing country music and country rock. This would take up a lot of time, so even if Robbins Garcia and the others went, they wouldn't be able to stay for that long. According to them, they would be back in about a week, or at most 10 days. That would be about it. All the preparations continued. Jiang Hai personally sent them to the airport and watched them get on the plane. This was also the first expedition of Jiang Hai's cowboy team. He hoped that they would have a good result. Of course, Jiang Hai did not know what the result would be. As the plane took off, Robbins Garcia, the 2 cows, and the 2 men slowly flew to San Antonio. When they arrived in San Antonio, the people in San Antonio specially came to pick them up. Robbins Garcia specifically talked to Jiang Hai, and then arranged for the 2 cows to go to their exhibition hall. Compared to last year, they only treated Jiang Hai as a fat sheep. This year, they really took Jiang Hai's Soaring Dragon Manor seriously. Although it was only a small exhibition hall, it was placed in a very important position, and the security there was also the best. After Robbins Garcia settled the cows, he left Harriman Fells here to look after them, while he and Brevard Hill went back to rest first. They would come back in the evening to replace him. Of course, Harriman Fells had no objection to this arrangement. When Jiang Hai's Soaring Dragon Manor appeared here, it caused some disturbances. This was because in the United States, there were almost no cowboys who did not know about Jiang Hai's Soaring Dragon Manor. Of course, there were also some ranchers who did not pay attention to this at all. However, everyone who came to participate in this livestock exhibition knew about the Soaring Dragon Manor and its cows. Originally, when the organizer sent Harriman Fells here, many people came to watch. These people were also people who came to participate in the exhibition. Although there would be security in the exhibition hall, how many people were really relieved? When Jiang Hai participated in the beef show for the first time in New York, some people came to make trouble. Even the security guards might not be reliable. You can't completely rely on others for safety. Therefore, in Jiang Hai's exhibition hall, as long as there were cows, there would be people watching it 24/7. It was the same in other exhibition halls. Some had 1 person, some had 2 people. Now that they saw the Soaring Dragon Manor, these people came over. To be honest, there were people who were not curious, but not many. They also wanted to see why Jiang Hai's cows could be sold at such a high price. Moreover, they heard that Jiang Hai made money by selling grass. This world was really unfair. For poor people like them, cows were worthless, and grass was even more worthless. For rich people like Jiang Hai, cows were valuable, and grass was even more valuable. These people looked outside for a while, and many people who knew the industry gave a thumbs up to Jiang Hai's cows. With their innocent eyes, they could not find any fault with them. The color of the cow's fur was quite good. Their fur was shiny and smooth, and their eyes were very lively. There was not a trace of lethargy in them. Compared with the carefully selected cattle at home, Jiang Hai's cattle had the advantage just from the appearance alone. At the same time, when some people saw that the troublesome Robbins Garcia had left, they approached Harriman Fells in an attempt to get some information out of him. Unfortunately, there was a reason why Robbins Garcia left Harriman Fells here. It was precisely because this fellow knew that his brain was not fast enough that he had always kept a respectful distance from those who did not have good intentions. No matter what they said, he would just pretend that he did not hear them. This move of his was very smooth. Chapter 963. Hey, I say, who is that guy over there? Why does everyone here surround him when he comes? Don't you see that he clearly doesn't want to talk to them? Is this interesting? A cowboy with a cigarette in his mouth looked at the people in the distance who had been rejected by Harriman Fells, but they still went forward to talk to him. The man said with some confusion, "Hey, you don't know him. Then do you know the meaning of the sign hanging over there?" Hearing this man's words, the middle-aged cowboy he asked didn't care. He took the cigarette in his hand, lit it, and pointed to the sign hanging above the exhibition hall in the distance. Looking at the sign, the man frowned and then shook his head. "You are a newcomer." Seeing that he didn't know the sign, the old cowboy couldn't help but laugh and say, "Hey, I just graduated from college last year. Because I have no future, I came back to help my father's ranch." Hearing that this man could tell that he was a newcomer at a glance, the cowboy who pretended to be old could not help but smile awkwardly. "I know you are a newcomer, but anyone who has been in the industry for a few years will know that sign." Hearing his words, the middle-aged cowboy smiled disdainfully, pointed to the sign in the distance, and smacked his lips gently. "That is a legend." "What do you mean? Is that company strong? I haven't heard my father talk about it." Hearing his words, the young man here also became interested and asked with a puzzled face. He really hadn't seen the company's sign. "Strong? No, it's not very strong, it's quite strong. Speaking of which, this company has only been popular for about 2 years, but the wealth it has created in these 2 years is something you can't earn even in 10 lifetimes." Glancing at the young man, the middle-aged cowboy smiled. Although he was a little jealous, what he said was correct. "So bad this?" Hearing that this company seemed to be very strong, the young man also sat down and asked with a puzzled face. "Then I will tell you. This company is called Soaring Dragon. I heard that the boss is a Huaxia person. The sign above is the Dragon of Huaxia. This story started 2 years ago." Seeing that the young cowboy was so interested, the middle-aged man also started to talk. Perhaps because his voice was a little loud, it didn't take long for many people to gather around him to listen to his story. Harriman Fells, who was not far away, also heard their conversation, but he chuckled. The middle-aged man's story was very interesting, but even if he racked his brains, he wouldn't know what the truth of the matter was. But then again, he didn't know what the truth of the matter was. To be honest, Zhang Hai was the only one who knew why these cows were so good and how this company started. When the next day, Zhang Hai's small exhibition hall was crowded with people. To be honest, most of the cowboys were even more confused. Why were Zhang Hai's cows so popular? They really couldn't understand. But whether they understood it or not, Zhang Hai's men knew that this year's champion would be none other than them. Just as everyone was talking about Zhang Hai was driving his car towards the town. Speaking of which, Zhang Hai sent his men to San Antonio. He was also a little hesitant at the beginning. Beef cows were different from red wine. To be honest, Zhang Hai didn't particularly value the red wine business. It belonged to the type of business that didn't matter if he had it or not. Therefore, he sent Dulles Gerard to brew red wine and then promote it in Europe. He didn't care too much about whether it would be promoted or not, but beef cows were different. Zhang Hai's beef cows were his main source of income now. However, today's matter could be regarded as satisfactory. Although Zhang Hai wasn't invited to San Antonio, they invited Zhang Hai's cows. Now, the popular ones were Zhang Hai and the Soaring Dragon Manor. With the Soaring Dragon Manor's cows, this was also a good choice. Moses Adams also became the legal counsel of the conference as he wished, and Zhang Hai was bound to have a good result. The most important thing was that Zhang Hai didn't leave this time. His women were quite happy. "It's good that you don't leave. Otherwise, when can we have children?" Looking at Zhang Hai's arrangement, Qi Jia also said with a smile. To be honest, they had been with Zhang Hai for a while, although they didn't do that kind of thing every day. However, most of the time, they did it once every other day. But even so, until now, they hadn't gotten pregnant. It had been confirmed that Zhang Hai didn't have any problems. Then what about them? It was impossible to think about it. It was impossible for so many people to have problems, right? So now, their only thought was that since it wasn't easy to get pregnant, then they would do it more. They would get pregnant eventually. Zhang Hai was very interested in this kind of thing. However, no matter how interested he was, once it came every day, Zhang Hai would feel a little scared. It was said that 30 was like a wolf, 40 was like a tiger. Now, Qi Jie and the others hadn't reached the age of being like a wolf yet, but Zhang Hai already felt that he couldn't protect them. If in the future, cough. So after sending off Robbins Garcia and the others yesterday, Zhang Hai had been working hard when he returned. According to Qi Jie and the others, since it was winter and there was nothing to do outside, it was better to stay at home and have children. What if they got pregnant? So, Zhang Hai almost didn't get out of bed after returning to the manor yesterday. This morning, they wanted to pounce on him, but Zhang Hai dodged them. If this continued, even if he had 8 times the physical fitness of an ordinary person, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. So, he found an excuse to go to the county. As for what excuse he used, Zhang Hai felt a little nervous when he said it, because he said that he was going to buy soy sauce. Fortunately, Zhang Hai's family had too many people, so the consumption of seasonings was indeed high. After finding an excuse, Zhang Hai was relieved. He drove to Winthrop town. Since he said that he was going to buy seasonings, the first thing he did was naturally to buy seasonings. He drove to the town's commercial street. There were many supermarkets there. There were large ones, small ones, and even those owned by Native Americans. Of course, they rented Zhang Hai's shops. Zhang Hai found a Chinese supermarket. In fact, it was a supermarket owned by Old Master Zhang Di Hai Shang Supermarket. Hai Shang Supermarket was not considered small among the Chinese supermarkets in the United States. It was considered to be above average. Since Zhang Hai's beef and fish helped, their industry had gradually expanded. At present, in terms of supermarkets, Hai Shang Supermarket was already a first-class existence among the Chinese supermarkets in the United States. Originally, Winthrop didn't have a Hai Shang supermarket. The reason why a shop was opened here was entirely because of Zhang Hai. Of course, this wasn't specially opened for Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai didn't have that much influence. This was completely opened for the tourists of Huaxia. No matter where people went, it was inevitable that they would not be acclimatized, let alone the difference between the United States and Huaxia. Therefore, when Winthrop was developing tourism, Zhang Hai had once mentioned that it would be best if there were some family hotels that allowed tourists to cook their own food. Zhang Hai's suggestion was naturally approved by the people of Winthrop. Therefore, many people in Winthrop could cook their own food. Of course, if you were used to the food here, it would be very convenient to eat in a restaurant. However, for some seafood, it would be a little expensive to eat in a restaurant. But for now, it was basically okay because ever since Zhang Hai opened the sea, he didn't sell lobsters and fish alone. Therefore, the seafood industry in Winthrop was still very impressive. Many of the things sold in the Hai Shang supermarket came from Huaxia, such as some spices. Americans didn't eat so many spices. Their spices were very simple and boring. These were prepared for the tourists of Huaxia. But now, they were prepared for Zhang Hai. After parking his car far away, Zhang Hai walked into the supermarket. Although this supermarket was called a Chinese supermarket and felt a little small, it was actually very big. It wasn't smaller than some of the large supermarkets in China. It occupied an area of at least 5,000 to 6,000 square meters. This was built by smashing several of Zhang Hai's shops. This supermarket was also divided into many areas like a normal supermarket. The home appliances area sold telephones, refrigerators, microwaves, TVs, sewing machines, and so on. This was also convenient for the local residents. In the household goods section, there were plates, bowls, plastic sheets, toilet paper, and so on. There was also a special makeup section. Basically, there were hair washing products, face washing products, and some makeup products. Everything was available. Walking inside, there was a special food area, dry fruit area, biscuits, milk, juice, and so on. After passing these, it was the largest fresh food area. There were rice, noodles, oil, salt, fruits, vegetables, fish, meat, and so on. Because it was a Chinese supermarket, the items on the shelves were labeled in both Chinese and English. Of course, there was only one price. Because in the United States, although RMB was not considered as waste paper, at least it couldn't be spent. After Zhang Hai entered the supermarket, he wandered around. Unknowingly, he walked to the seasoning area. Naturally, he swept up all the goods like a whirlwind sweeping away the clouds. A bottle of soy sauce and old soy sauce, vinegar, tomato sauce, steamed fish, bean drum, oyster sauce, cooking wine, rice wine. It was a mess. As long as there was something on the shelf, Zhang Hai would buy it. Anyway, they would finish all these things. When Zhang Hai turned a corner, a familiar face appeared in front of him. Chapter 964. Sandy. Zhang Hai couldn't help but call out when he saw the person coming from around the corner. Yes, the person who came was none other than Xueqi Clive. When she saw Zhang Hai, she was obviously stunned for a moment, then she smiled and nodded. You're here to buy things too. Zhang Hai hesitated for a moment, then smiled and said to Xueqi Clive. To be honest, Zhang Hai was a little, at a loss when it came to Xueqi Clive. Well, it wasn't wrong to use this word. After all, Zhang Hai had always had an affair with Xueqi Clive. Although there was no real development, the two of them were like a layer of window paper that could be broken with a little force. However, ever since she was transferred to the town hall and met Qili, the relationship between the two of them became a little distant. It seemed that she couldn't accept having Zhang Hai with someone else. Zhang Hai couldn't say that she was wrong. After all, this was human nature. In Zhang Hai's manner, to be honest, there were too many freaks, and there were very few normal people. Yes, you bought so much seasoning? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Xueqi Clive gently brushed her hair behind her ear, then looked at the things in Zhang Hai's car with some confusion. It wasn't common for someone to buy so much seasoning. Hee. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai was embarrassed to say that it was because he loved many people. Hey, can't you see me? You're only talking to my sister. At this moment, another voice sounded in Zhang Hai's ears. Then, Zhang Hai saw that there was another figure beside Xueqi Clive. When he saw this figure, Zhang Hai was familiar with it. Cliff, Xueqi Clive's younger sister. However, the two of them only had half of the same bloodline. However, the relationship between the two sisters was quite good. This kind of thing might not be common in Huaxia. After all, they weren't born from the same mother. In Huaxia, it was important to pay attention to who was first and who was second, but in America, this kind of thing was actually very common. Therefore, in America, there were many families that got together later, and the relationship between sisters and brothers was still very good. Compared to the Cliff that Zhang Hai saw a few years ago, the current Cliff had changed a lot. After all, she was in college, and she wasn't in her first or second year, but was preparing to enter her third year. She had also learned how to put on makeup and dress up. In China, when she was in her fourth year and first year, she was like a completely different person, even more so in America. At this time, Cliff's figure was getting better and better. Although it was still winter, she was wearing a woolen sweater, a pair of leggings, and a pair of short boots, which showed off her perfect figure. The places that should be big were big, and the places that should be thin were slim. Especially her two legs, which were straight and slender at the same time. A thin cotton-padded jacket was draped over her arm, making her look very fashionable and beautiful. When she saw Zhang Hai looking at her, she purposely showed off her body, making Zhang Hai even more embarrassed. However, it was true that it wasn't good to look at a girl like that. Hi, With an awkward smile, Zhang Hai said to Cliff. When she heard Zhang Hai calling her, Cliff also smiled and stood behind Xueqi Clive. She was very clear about the story between Zhang Hai and her sister, but at the same time, she also looked at Zhang Hai curiously. When she first met Zhang Hai was just a potential stock. You couldn't tell if he would become as good as he is now. But now it seems that it was her sister's mistake that she didn't catch this guy at the beginning. This is a perfect rich husband. You continue to shop, we still have to buy some things. Feeling that the air was a little awkward and frozen, Xueqi Clive smiled politely at Zhang Hai, then pushed the cart past Zhang Hai. Hearing her indifferent words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but sigh in his heart. It seems that there is no chance, but thinking about it, I was too greedy. You know, I'm not just carrying the responsibility of a woman. Phew, let's just consider this as turning over a new leaf. Zhang Hai smiled and prepared to continue pushing the cart forward. But at this moment, Cliff suddenly ran back and patted Zhang Hai on the shoulder. Hey, your phone is still the same one. Looking at Zhang Hai, Cliff said to Zhang Hai. Oh, it's still the same one. Hearing Cliff's words, Zhang Hai also nodded, not knowing what she was going to do. I have something to ask you. I will talk to you on the phone when I have time. Hearing Zhang Hai's answer, Karma Cliff quickly took some ketchup and ran away. Looking at her anxious look, Zhang Hai was completely confused. However, these had nothing to do with him. He couldn't understand why she wanted him to do it, so he shrugged and continued to push the cart forward. Soon, he bought all the things he wanted to buy and brought them to the car. Originally, he wanted to go out for a stroll, but now, he wasn't in the mood to go out. So, after thinking for a while, he drove back to the manor. Zhang Hai himself was a loser and an otaku. For him, there was nothing bad about staying at home. Driving, he soon came to Zhang Hai's manor. After parking the car, Zhang Hai got out of the car with a few large bags of things. Although these spices were really heavy, it was impossible for Zhang Hai to not be able to carry them. Walking inside with the things, Zhang Hai found that there was no one in the villa. Only Delina, Marian, and Taraga were sitting there watching TV. Seeing that Zhang Hai was back, they also looked up at Zhang Hai. "Why are there only 3 of you? Where are the others?" After putting the things in the kitchen and coming out, Zhang Hai looked at the 3 girls in front of him with some doubts. He touched the hair of Delina who was sitting in the middle and asked them. They went to take a bath. Slapping away Zhang Hai's hand, Delina pouted and said to Zhang Hai, "Take a bath? Then why didn't you go with them?" Hearing her words, Zhang Hai was stunned. "What's going on? They didn't take us with them. They just told us that if you came back, you should go with them." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Marian also looked at Zhang Hai and said while blinking her eyes. Hearing her words, although Zhang Hai still didn't know what they were going to do, he still walked out of the door and walked towards the bathroom. When Zhang Hai left, the 3 girls also gathered together. "They're really too much. They didn't even take us with them." Taraga watched Zhang Hai walking away and said angrily, "Alas, we can't help it. Who told us to be his daughters, not his women? Didn't he notice that we're ready?" Looking at Zhang Hai's back, Delina rubbed a certain indescribable part above her well-developed breasts and said in a discouraged way. Zhang Hai really didn't know how they felt about Zhang Hai. However, Zhang Hai only knew that he had always treated them as his own daughters, although they were about the same age and had no blood relationship with him. "Hey, you're his daughters, but I'm not. Why doesn't he want me?" Throwing a disdainful glance at the 2 underaged girls who wanted to do something to Zhang Hai, Delina proudly gestured at her well-developed breasts. Zhang Hai was 14 years old when he found Delina and Marian. After 3 years, they were already 17 years old this year. However, in Zhang Hai's eyes, children would always be children. Zhang Hai was already 29 years old this year. Who could he reason with? Tisk, don't even think about it. Humph. After hearing Tarag's words, Delina and Marian made the most contemptuous hand gesture towards him at the same time before saying complacently. At the sight of their looks, Tarag gave up the thought of lecturing them. Instead, he directly charged at them. The 3 girls were in a mess at once. Although it was 1 versus 2, Tarag, who had lived in the forest since he was young, was much more powerful than Delina and Marian. Therefore, he gained the upper hand in this battle. However, Zhang Hai couldn't see the scenery inside the villa. At this time, he had already come to the bathroom. Because there were only Zhang Hai's girls, Zhang Hai didn't care and went straight to the big bathroom. But as soon as he walked in, Zhang Hai was startled. At this time in Zhang Hai's sight, he only saw Qi Jia, Qi Ya, Ai Xiaoxi, Feng Yunchen, Azalina, Aphrodite, Dana, Hilda, Paige, Shira, Ohilia, Bridget, Janice, Galena, and Walla Shelley. These 15 girls were all wearing very simple but very seductive clothes. They were all kneeling neatly in front of him. Looking at their actions, Zhang Hai was surprised again. He found that he had a lot of lucky guesses today. "Master, do you want to take a shower first, or do you want to do that first, or do that while taking a shower?" Looking at Zhang Hai's dumbfounded look, Feng Yunchen blinked her eyes and said to Zhang Hai with a smile, "You guys, what the hell are you doing?" Looking at these girls in front of him, Zhang Hai walked in front of them with a puzzled look. What's going on? Why was there something he couldn't understand? But to be honest, the seduction was just a moment ago. Seeing Zhang Hai walking in, Feng Yunchen also waved to the people behind her. Aphrodite and the others took the initiative to stand up and walk to Zhang Hai's side to help him change his clothes. But when changing clothes, Some parts of the body that can't be described always inevitably rubbed against Zhang Hai's body. And intentionally or unintentionally, they also pressed Zhang Hai's hand on some parts that can't be described. Seeing this scene, Zhang Hai was even more stunned. His eyes looked around, but he didn't know what to say or do. Looking at Zhang Hai's appearance, Feng Yunchen proudly raised her eyebrows at Qi Jie. This was her plan. Chapter 965. As for their relationship with Zhang Hai, in fact, when Zhang Hai got up and left this morning, they had already vaguely noticed it. However, it was a normal relationship between a man and a woman. Although Zhang Hai would not feel tired of them, it was always like this. Perhaps Zhang Hai was also a little tired. Therefore, after Zhang Hai left, Qi Jie and the others had a small meeting to summarize the problem of how to continue to squeeze Zhang Hai. If Zhang Hai was unwilling, it would indeed be a little troublesome. However, they really wanted to make the best use of their time. At this time, Feng Yunchen, who was very good in this aspect, spoke. Men, in her opinion, were like kites. If you pulled him too tightly, he would not be able to fly high, and he would fall easily. No one could play with him. If you let him go too easily, he might fly away. This was also a very important problem. Therefore, controlling a man was like flying a kite. Sometimes it was tight, but sometimes it had to be loose. Of course, the loose mentioned now did not mean to find a few more girls for Zhang Hai. To be honest, Zhang Hai's harem group was still quite large. Most of the people here had no desires. Those who were competitive were only a few people. The topic had gone off topic. Now, to let Zhang Hai go loose, it did not mean to find other girls for Zhang Hai. That would be great. Now, they had to turn the initiative into a passive one. Zhang Hai enjoyed the feeling of being forcibly possessed by a woman. It was commonly known as the feeling of being pushed back. However, being pushed back every day, Zhang Hai's heart would be annoyed one day. Today was a small sign. Therefore, what they had to do now was to let Zhang Hai have a sense of novelty. Just like an old married couple, sometimes there had to be some emotion, let alone them. Naturally, there had to be such a thing as emotion. Although Qi Jie and Qi did not know much about this, since Feng Yunchen said so, they would give it a try. Anyway, there was no loss. Therefore, after Zhang Hai left, they went to Feng Yunchen and Ai Xiaoxi's room. What did Feng Yunchen and Ai Xiaoxi used to do? Models. Of course, this model might be in quotation marks. They were not like those international supermodels who could walk on the catwalk and have endorsements. Recently, people like them were called young models or online models. At most, they would be endorsements for some Taobao stores. More often, they would be photographed as goddesses of otaku and walk the peripheral route. Of course, these two had not been otaku, but they had been goddesses of otaku before. Those clothes and so on, maybe to add to the fun, they did not throw them away. Now, it was time for everyone to pick. Who liked what kind of clothes, what color, what kind, they directly picked out in Feng Yunchen's room. Because Qi Jie and the others had agreed to a rotation system. Now that these girls let them meet each other, they didn't feel uncomfortable. It wasn't like they hadn't messed around with Zhang Hai before, so they picked out the clothes very quickly. Azalina picked a translucent bikini, the kind that only had two small triangular pockets in the front, and the rest of the bikini was made of thread. She specially picked a bright red one, which was quite eye-catching with her bronze-colored skin. Qi Jie chose a striped swimsuit with a front button. There was no rope, only a bag that was about the size of a palm. There was a button in the front that looked like a flower. It could be removed with a gentle twist or a flick of the button. The bottom part of the swimsuit was a pair of triangular conservative pants that looked pure and clear. Feng Yunchen played a little more freely and directly made 3 masks. Well, in fact, it wasn't just a mask. It was just that 3 small masks happened to cover some parts, but it gave people more space to daydream. Ai Xiaoxi was wearing a large V-neck shirt. The V-neck was almost open to the navel. There were also 2 triangular pockets and some straps on it. It looked very stylish and very cool. Chia got a very conservative bikini from somewhere, but unfortunately, there was no conservative bikini here. After putting it on, she found that it was more than 1 size smaller. This kind of bikini was often seen in Japanese cartoons. Even a fake otaku like Zhang Hai knew that this bikini was called kosui. It could make the upper body and lower body parts visible. After putting it on, she felt that something was wrong. When she wanted to take it off, it was already too late. She was forced to wear this bikini by the others. Also, Wallace Shelley's bikini was very impressive. She only wore a hunter bikini. This bikini was originally for people who were relatively small. It could hold up the fat and squeeze it into a shape. But she was a giant to begin with, so this squeeze only made her even more violent. After choosing the clothes, they said goodbye to Daliana, Marion, and Taraga, and then went to the bathroom. While taking a bath, they studied what to do when Zhang Hai came later. Zhang Hai didn't know this at this time. Until now that Zhang Hai came, they also began to use the moves they had just studied. Zhang Hai's clothes were taken off in a short time, and then someone pulled him to the hot spring. The girls here used the hot spring water to kiss Zhang Hai's body and spit out the water to help Zhang Hai bathe. Soon, Zhang Hai's body was wet. Then the girls let Zhang Hai stand up. They all applied bath lotion on their bodies, especially on some indescribable parts, and then began to help Zhang Hai with the bath lotion. At this time, Feng Yunchen went behind Zhang Hai and stretched out her hand to touch Zhang Hai's indescribable part from behind. Phew, you guys, wow. To be honest, Zhang Hai had experienced these things before. Whether it was when he went out to play or went to Perwalton, he had experienced such hospitality before, but it was far from being as shocking and moving as today. After all, in his eyes, those were all wild flowers. It was inevitable for them to work hard to please him, but these were all family flowers. He would treat them well even if they didn't do this. But now these girls were doing it. Zhang Hai felt something else. Is it fun? Looking at Zhang Hai's expression, although she didn't want to admit it, Qi Jie had to admit that Feng Yunchen was indeed very strong in this aspect. Sometimes, it was more effective to let a man take the initiative. Thinking of this, she also came over and said to Zhang Hai with a smile. At the same time, she stuck out her tongue and licked Zhang Hai's neck. Looking at her pretty face and listening to her voice, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile. Then he hugged her waist and kissed her on the lips. Seeing that the fire here was almost lit, Aphrodite and the others also washed the foam off Zhang Hai's body. Then 4 or 5 people knelt down and began to serve Zhang Hai's brothers. Under Feng Yunchen's signal, Aphrodite also began to use her tongue to attack Zhang Hai's back. When this feeling came, Zhang Hai really couldn't stand it. Come on. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai picked up Qi Jie, who had already been prepared in front of him, and was ready to fight directly. But at this moment, a harsh ringtone sounded. Originally, Zhang Hai didn't want to pay attention to it, but this phone kept ringing. At the same time, Chia also went over there. After seeing that the caller was Edouard Anderson, she brought the phone to Zhang Hai. This damn. Zhang Hai muttered in a low voice. He had never hated Edouard Anderson as much as he did now, but this hatred passed quickly and disappeared quickly. He knew that Edouard Anderson definitely wouldn't call him for no reason, so he thought for a moment, and under Qi Jie's slightly melancholic gaze, he swiped to answer the phone. Hello, it's me, what's the matter? Suppressing his unhappiness, Zhang Hai asked Edouard Anderson on the other side of the phone. Boss, there's big trouble. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Edouard Anderson also said calmly on the other side. What's the situation? Tell me clearly, someone came to steal the fish? Listening to the motor of the boat on Edouard Anderson's side and the sound of the sea breeze, Zhang Hai frowned. Now is not the time for fishing boats to go out to sea, because Zhang Hai and the others fishing more often go out to sea at night, so that they can use the fish luring light to push the fish together and catch better fish. Now that they are going out to sea, it means that there may be some trouble. Is someone coming to steal the fish again? It's more troublesome than that. It's not that someone is coming to steal the fish, but the fish are coming to steal the fish. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Edouard Anderson almost gritted his teeth and said to Zhang Hai. Fish. Hearing Edouard Anderson's words, Zhang Hai froze for a moment. What does it mean that the fish are coming to steal the fish? It's killer whales. There is a group of killer whales around our fishery. Hearing Zhang Hai's doubts, Edouard Anderson no longer kept him in suspense and said directly to Zhang Hai. Hearing his gnashing teeth, Zhang Hai subconsciously wanted to say that the killer whales are in big trouble. Since Edouard Anderson said it's big trouble, it may be big trouble. Okay, I'll go and see it right away. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai shrugged helplessly at Qi Jie and the others. To be honest, there is something going on in the manor now. He has to go and see it. Although these girls are working very hard, he is really ready. But he still has priorities. Hanging up the phone, Jiang Hai lowered his head and gave Qi Jie a deep French kiss. I like it very much, really. I really like it. When I come back, let's continue. Looking at Qi Jie's eyes, Jiang Hai smiled, then said something to the girls around him, then quickly put on his clothes and left. Chapter 966. F** King Whale. Jiang Hai put on his clothes and got out of the bathtub. Indeed, Jiang Hai now had the intention to kill. But unfortunately, he can't kill people, so he can only kill fish. Whales are not fish. Anyway, he still dares to kill things in the sea. Probably, almost he dares to kill things in the sea. Anyway, Jiang Hai didn't care so much. He trotted back to his villa, then rode the four-wheeled motorcycle and ran away. Now the weather was warming up, and only some shady places had snow. The snow in other places had almost melted, so naturally, he had to ride the four-wheeled motorcycle. Jiang Hai rushed all the way to the dock. He originally wanted to go directly to the airport. But considering that Marin Rupert, who can fly now, is also on the sea, and Belle Lester has to take care of the cows, he is still a little scared to fly the plane himself. Although he also learned how to fly a plane, it should be different from driving a car. If a car crash happens, at most, the car will be destroyed. Jiang Hai and the others don't have any cliffs or anything, and it is impossible for the car to crash and die. As long as Jiang Hai is not killed immediately, then he can escape. But flying a plane is different. This thing may really be finished. Jiang Hai is so afraid of death, so he decided to drive a boat. When they arrived at the dock, Eleanor Cece, who stayed here, had already prepared a boat. Then the two boarded the boat and headed to the place where Edward Anderson sent the signal. Because they really drove very fast, about an hour or so, Jiang Hai saw Edward Anderson's boat from afar. In addition to their boat, there are many dorsal fins in the sea in the distance. These damn whales. Looking at the killer whales in front of him, Eleanor Cece couldn't help but curse. Then their boat approached quickly. After reaching the vicinity, before they could get close, Eleanor Cece had already thrown out a rope, which was caught by Tommy Charles on the boat. First, the boat and the boat were tightly pulled together, then quickly pulled the boat over and let Jiang Hai and Eleanor Cece board Jiang Hai's fishing boat. After Jiang Hai boarded the boat, he immediately ran to Edward Anderson's side and calmed his breath. Looking at the dorsal fins in the distance and Edward Anderson's serious face, Jiang Hai's face also became gloomy. Looking at the killer whales in the distance, he also counted them. He originally thought that it was just a small group, but now it seemed that he was too naive because this group of killer whales is definitely a monster. In other words, it means that Jiang Hai is really in big trouble at this time. These killer whales are definitely not a good thing for him. Some people will say that Jiang Hai is making a mountain out of a molehill, but why did Jiang Hai say that? That's because killer whales eat fish. In this world, no law is absolutely fair, such as the environmental protection law, which is very important in the world. This law was actually very harmful to the fishermen and herdsmen. However, for the sake of the future of mankind, the government gave up on the benefits of these people. It had to be said that this was unfair to the fishermen, farmers, and herdsmen. This matter is the same everywhere. For example, in China, you work hard to raise some cattle and sheep, waiting to be sold. But when the wolf comes, the tiger comes and eats these cattle and sheep. If you kill the tiger, you have to be sentenced. But if you don't kill the tiger, in order to maintain the tiger's wild nature, the country is happy to see your cattle and sheep eaten. After being eaten, the government says that they will compensate you with some money. But the money is not even enough to buy calves and lambs. Who can you find to reason with? Moreover, your land is a waste of money because there are wild animals such as tigers and wolves here. How can you continue to raise them? But in fact, this is not bad in China. If it is in India or Africa, who will compensate you? If you are eaten, you deserve it. You are giving away the animals, but the laws and regulations there are not too strict. If you kill them out of revenge, no one will know. There are two sides to this. Compared with these countries, the situation in Europe, the United States, Canada, and Australia is more annoying. It is the same for tigers and wolves. If they are eaten, they will compensate you with some money. It is up to you whether you want to sell your land or not. It is not clear whether anyone will buy it. Although the money they lost was more than what they lost in China, for Zhang Hai, the money they lost was just a fart. How much is his beef and fish worth? Is it something these guys can afford to pay? According to the current situation of the United States government, even if they lose all their money, they may not be able to pay Zhang Hai's property. Therefore, they are destined to pay according to the laws and regulations. Fortunately, the United States is not Australia. Australia is more ruthless. Driving in Australia, if a bird gets caught in your windshield and kills it, you will also be sentenced. Therefore, in order to avoid these troublesome things, Zhang Hai has been guarding against this for a long time. On land, he built a fence and raised 3 bodyguards in the forest. A mountain lion, although it is about the same size as an African lion, maybe even bigger than an African lion, a giant python and a crocodile. These 3 guys are guarding him. On the other hand, Zhang Hai was able to deal with people on land. If animals came, these 3 guys would be able to deal with them. For example, coyotes and the like, if they dared to come, they would be courting death. Even if they were discovered by others, Zhang Hai would be able to push them away. He didn't know that these guys were killed in the food chain, so what did it have to do with him? Therefore, Zhang Hai basically has no worries on land. With these 3 guys escorting him, Zhang Hai is very relieved. In the ocean, such a thing has happened before, but at that time, a group of hammerhead sharks came out. Zhang Hai and the silly couple killed these guys, and then sent a group of dolphins to them. Zhang Hai went into the water to see them a few days ago. The silly couple gave birth to 3 small sharks, and they looked quite big. The dolphins also have a new family. It seems that his guards are gradually growing, and they also know that they are basically hunting in the periphery of Zhang Hai's sea area. Occasionally, when they are not full or want to eat supper, they will come back to pick some fish that have no economic value but the same nutritional value to eat, such as some small tuna, bonito, and many cod in the Atlantic Ocean. Later, Zhang Hai brought back his most powerful weapon at present, Roger, a giant squid. After feeding him a lot of aura and enough food, this guy was like a sea monster. With such a force here, it is not an exaggeration to say that it is impregnable, but unfortunately, this army was challenged today. Killer whale, also known as killer whale and killer whale, is a very smart animal. It is a social animal. Even humans are quite fond of this marine mammal because this creature is really like a puppy. It can be domesticated. To be honest, a long time ago, Zhang Hai also liked this creature very much. However, he only liked it when it was in the aquarium. He absolutely did not like it when it was in the ocean. This was not Zhang Hai being cold-blooded, cruel, or anything like that. After all, these guys weren't eating your fish. Naturally, many people would stand on the moral high ground and speak nonsense. So Zhang Hai didn't listen to what these people said at all. He only knew that now these guys are affecting his ability to make money. These guys are really here. Looking at the huge army of 41 killer whales in front of him, Edward Anderson's face was quite ugly. Now these killer whales are most afraid of this ship and the people on it. Their IQ tells them that these guys are not to be trifled with, so they are still watching. What do you mean? Hearing Edward Anderson's words, Zhang Hai thought for a moment and asked him. A long time ago, our fishery was targeted by killer whales, but every time they wanted to attack, they would be driven away by some dolphins. I remember that those dolphins were raised by you, and one of them was a big shark. It seems that you released it. It seems that they regard this place as their territory, so I didn't care too much about it, but I didn't expect that these guys still didn't give up on this place. They are actually entangled to attack us. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Edward Anderson took a deep breath and said with a dignified face. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai's eyes narrowed. He naturally knows that it was Big Fool and the others who drove these guys away, and if he is not mistaken, Big Fool and the others should also be in the nearby waters at this time. Sharks don't need to breathe. Zhang Hai can't see them underwater, but dolphins need to breathe, so they will float up from time to time in the distance. But with only 2 sharks and a dozen dolphins, how can they be the opponents of these guys? Even with Roger, it won't be enough. At this time, Zhang Hai's mind was constantly turning. To be honest, Zhang Hai himself doesn't want to hunt these spiritual creatures, but they are really threatening his fishery. What if he uses spiritual energy to turn them into his own subordinates? As soon as this idea emerged, Zhang Hai directly killed it. What a joke! Under such circumstances, how can he turn them into his own subordinates? Can he force out more than 40 drops of spiritual energy? When Zhang Hai first released his blood, he released up to 4 drops a day, which was like letting him masturbate 20 times, which was quite tiring. Later, he was able to force out spiritual energy. Looking at Aphrodite and the others, it took him several days to cure them. The most he did was to release spiritual energy to the dolphins. He released 14 drops at one time, and it took him almost a month to recover. Although he has become stronger now, he will probably be exhausted after releasing spiritual energy for 10 or 20 times. Most importantly, if Zhang Hai wanted to release his spirit qi, he would need the help of the media realm. He needed to touch these guys. Are you sure that when he touches this one, it won't be directly dismembered by the other 40? These guys are not stupid. What if they drag Zhang Hai into the deep sea? Wouldn't that expose his secret of being able to move underwater? This secret must not be exposed. If there were only 1 or 2 of them, Zhang Hai could still deal with them, but now there are 41 of them. What should he do? Can we hunt them? After thinking about it, Zhang Hai may really have no other way, so he looked at Edward Anderson and said seriously, since he can't subdue them or drive them away, he will start a massacre. Chapter 967. Unfortunately, I can't because it can see. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Edward Anderson pointed to the top of his head helplessly. He naturally didn't mean that God could see or God could see. He meant that the satellite could see. Killing wild animals, no matter what the reason is, Zhang Hai's lawsuit will be settled. And in the United States, just like in China, killing wild animals is punishable by going to prison. Zhang Hai is the backbone of their manor. If something happens to Zhang Hai, it will be troublesome. So when Zhang Hai just mentioned it, Edward Anderson rejected Zhang Hai with a gloomy face. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai's brows couldn't help but frown. Is this a silent loss? Just as Zhang Hai was in a dilemma, suddenly the group of killer whales in front of them moved. Maybe they really couldn't stand the food in front of them, so a sound like pulling rusty iron chains passed into Zhang Hai's ears. Boss, they are going to attack. Listening to these sounds, Edward Anderson said angrily, killer whales have a special feature. They can be regarded as the masters of language in the ocean because they can make more than 60 kinds of sounds, each of which has a different meaning. Now the sound does not mean that they are going to attack. Use the water cannon to drive them away. Zhang Hai roared loudly as he hammered the railing. Zhang Hai didn't want to go to prison, and he couldn't go to prison. There are definitely a lot of people staring at him now. If he was still here, everything would be fine. If he went to prison and was gone, it is estimated that those bad guys would come out. Even the United States government would definitely not give him such an opportunity, so he must not give them any excuse. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Edward Anderson immediately ordered the adjustment of the water cannon. Although the water cannon also hurts wild animals, it is only hurting and driving them away. There will be no problem. In this world, no matter what, it is based on people. If they want to kill these killer whales, there will naturally be some trouble, but if they just drive them away, then even if the Environmental Protection Agency says anything, it will not pose any threat to Zhang Hai. With Zhang Hai's order, the water cannon on the big ship where he was also launched in an instant, directly hitting the 2 killer whales closest to him. The huge impact of the water directly knocked them back several meters. Then they shook their dizzy heads and looked at the ship in front of them in horror. To put it bluntly, these animals are still afraid of humans. This is also the fear of being killed by humans. This fear in their bones has penetrated into their DNA. Now that they see Zhang Hai really dare to hit them, they are afraid. Many killer whales turned their heads and ran. But at this moment, another voice sounded. It seems that the leader killer whale saw some clues. It was only a water cannon that hit them just now, not a whaling gun or a firearm. If it was just a water cannon, they would not be afraid. With the order of the killer whale, all the killer whales temporarily stopped their fear and then plunged into the sea. Killer whales are indeed good swimmers. They can dive below 300 meters and hold their breath for more than an hour. Of course, they usually come up to take a breath in more than 20 minutes, but the limit can even reach about 2 hours. Killer whales like to surround and kill humpback whales, even blue whales. Their method is to take advantage of their long diving time to directly surround these whales in the deep sea and not let them take a breath, so that they can suffocate them to death. These killer whales are all adult killer whales, and the non-adults probably did not let them come over, so their hunting experience is still quite rich. Now that they heard the call of the leader, they went directly into the water. Water cannon, no matter how hard it is fired, it is still water, but water hits water, how many meters of impact can it have? Although it is strong in the air, it is useless in the water. Now the leader depends on whether Zhang Hai has a whaling gun or not. In fact, Zhang Hai did not have one. So he could only watch these whales dive into the water and quickly rush into his fishing ground. Seeing this, Zhang Hai's hand pinched the fishing boat because of excessive force, leaving fingerprints on the iron railing of the fishing boat. What should he do now? No one knew, including Edward Anderson. They were all staring at each other. Although they hated them, they had no way to kill these guys. If they could not kill these guys would continue to invade Zhang Hai's fishing ground. It was impossible to drive them away. These guys were such a dog-skin plaster. Even if Zhang Hai surrounded the fishing ground in the future, these guys would tear the barbed wire of the fishing ground and rush in. If they were not careful, they would be entangled to death. Then it would be Zhang Hai's responsibility. Yes, they were so unreasonable. Who the F asterisk CK? Who the F asterisk CK? Who the F asterisk CK? Looking at the group of killer whales rushing into his sea area, Zhang Hai was really helpless now except for shouting hard. At this moment, a stream of water rushed over, and the Imperial Guards on Zhang Hai's side began to attack. The one in the lead was naturally Big Dumb. Now Big Dumb was smaller than the killer whale, and even bigger than the biggest one. His wife was definitely not smaller than the average adult killer whale. These two were also the ones who rushed in the most. And the most important thing was that sharks did not need to breathe, so they had the advantage underwater. There is still a chance. Control the water cannon. If those killer whales dare to float up, hit them hard for me. Looking at the appearance of the water, Zhang Hai's eyes couldn't help but light up and he shouted loudly. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the people on his ship adjusted the position of the water cannon for the first time, aiming at the sea level, waiting for the killer whales to float up. Although they didn't know why the killer whales wanted to float up, Zhang Hai was the boss and he had the final say. At this time in the sea, Big Dumb took the lead and rushed directly towards the killer whale in the front. This killer whale was not easy to deal with. Seeing Big Dumb rushing over, it did not retreat. As the top predator in the sea, the killer whale had never been afraid of a shark. Of course, its brain was not enough to let it understand why this shark was so big in the first place. In fact, it was not the brave who would win, because Big Dumb was much stronger than this killer whale. At this time, there was no doubt about his combat effectiveness. He rushed over and bit directly at the killer whale in front of him. Looking at the rows of sharp teeth, at the last moment, the killer whale, a smart creature, was scared. It wanted to dodge and hit Big Dumb with its tail, but unfortunately, Big Dumb rushed directly to the tail. Only a click was heard. Big Dumb directly bit the killer whale's tail. Then with a swing of his head, a large piece of the killer whale's tail was directly torn off. Big Dumb did not eat it. After spitting it out, he turned around and continued to fight the second killer whale. This killer whale lost the use of its tail fin, it couldn't run fast, and its combat effectiveness was greatly reduced. At this time, it also panicked and wanted to escape, but unfortunately, could it escape? Big Dumb's wife came from behind in an instant, bit on its stomach, and directly tore off a large piece of meat. This killer whale is dead. At this time, Big Dumb was also like a tiger in a flock of sheep, and began to attack the second killer whale. For a while, Big Dumb was very powerful, as if there was no one around. The second killer whale did not last long. Its left fin was directly torn apart by Big Dumb. It wailed and wanted to retreat, but its tail was bitten off by Big Dumb's wife. Without one fin, the killer whale without a tail could only slowly sink to the bottom of the sea. Its result was to be crushed by the sea or suffocated by the water. Seeing the incomparable fighting power of Big Dumb and his wife, the killer whale leader here was also shocked. In fact, many of the killer whales here were driven away by Big Dumb and his wife. But in the past, because Big Dumb and his wife didn't lack food, they didn't chase after them. They were never so fierce. Now that Big Dumb and his wife started to play fierce, these killer whales were really scared. Good job. Seeing Big Dump's invincible strength, Zhang Hai also waved his fist. It was too awesome. However, the killer whales quickly stabilized. The one in the lead should be determined to enter Zhang Hai's fishing ground. Many killer whales began to set up their formation. 2/3 of the killer whales formed a circular formation, surrounding the silly couple from a distance. More than a dozen killer whales rushed to the dolphins in the distance. Originally, they were just trying to contain the dolphins in the distance. Killer whales eat dolphins. Regardless of whether those who like killer whales believe it or not, this is a fact. These dolphins, although nourished by Zhang Hai's aura, may have been because they were already adults when Zhang Hai bought them, so their size was not too big. Basically, now they were only 3 or 4 meters long. Such a length was far worse than the 8 or 9 meters long killer whales. If it was 4 against 1 killer whale, then the dolphins still had a good chance of winning. But now there were 2 dolphins. They had to deal with at least 3 killer whales, and they couldn't do it. The dolphins were almost instantly eaten by the same male killer whale, and then the remaining killer whales began to prey on the dolphins. Compared to the fishes in Zhang Hai's manor, these dolphins were the only ones that received Zhang Hai's complete spiritual qi. Later on, they were fed a lot of fish and beef with spiritual qi. Therefore, the temptation of these dolphins was much greater than the fishes. For a while, the killer whales on this side also opened their white teeth and bit Zhang Hai's dolphins. When Big Dumb and his wife saw that these guys dared to deal with their little brother, they rushed forward at the first time. But unfortunately, 2 fists couldn't fight against 4 hands. A hero couldn't fight against many people. And a tiger couldn't fight against a pack of wolves. These killer whales gathered together, moving forward and retreating from time to time. While teasing Big Dumb and his wife, they trapped them in the battle circle. For a while, the scene was thrilling. Chapter 968. Zhang Hai's ocean was almost unpolluted. Of course, it could not be compared with those diving spots, coral reefs, and the like. The bottom could be seen at a glance. Zhang Hai's visibility here was only about 3 or 5 meters. If the water was too clear, there would be no fish. This sentence was not just a saying, but Zhang Hai's physical fitness 8 times that of ordinary people allowed him to see the fierce battle under the sea. Although he could not see clearly, at least he could see the black shadows. At this time, in Zhang Hai's eyes, the situation of his underwater escorts can be described as bad. The group of killer whales on this side trapped the silly couple, while the group of killer whales on the other side attacked the dolphins. For a while, the dolphins were still in danger. The gap between the dolphins and the killer whales was too big. They did not swim as fast as the killer whales, and they were not as big as the killer whales. If they bit the killer whales would bleed at most, but if the killer whales bit them they would die. But fortunately, Zhang Hai's dolphins had also evolved. Not only were they bigger, but they were also faster and more agile. Now they were relying on their agile posture to constantly deal with the killer whales. But the killer whales were very intelligent. For a while, they saw that they could not take down Zhang Hai's dolphins one-on-one, so they changed their strategy. Several male killer whales continued to crash into the dolphins' formation, while some other killer whales began to surround and kill. 5-1. No matter how strong the dolphins were, it was absolutely impossible to escape. Just in Zhang Hai's eyes, in a flash, a dolphin was blocked by 4 dolphins here. Just as it was thinking about how to escape, a killer whale suddenly rushed out from below and directly hit the dolphin's stomach. The huge impact directly knocked the dolphin out of the water. Then this guy also jumped out of the water. He did not give the dolphin in midair any chance and directly bit it. Fire! Seeing that his dolphin was bitten and bleeding, Zhang Hai roared. His men also launched the water cannon at the first time and directly blasted the killer whale out in midair. Although the killer whale fell flat on the sea level, its head shook and it sank to the bottom of the sea again. As for the dolphin, it was already dead when it fell because its body was almost bitten in 2. Only some flesh and skin were still connected, and its eyes had turned grayish-black. Give me the gun. Looking at the dolphin that floated on the water for a short time and then sank again, it was not an exaggeration to say that Zhang Hai's teeth were cracking. Seeing his men die in front of him, if Zhang Hai was not angry, then was he still a human? Boss! Looking at Zhang Hai's appearance, Edward Anderson hesitated, but he still did not give the gun to Zhang Hai. Instead, he held it in his hand. Looking at his appearance, Zhang Hai looked at him with some doubts. I killed the whale, boss. I can't do without you in the manor. When I come out, will you not let me come back? Looking at Zhang Hai's eyes, Edward Anderson smiled and took a deep breath. It seemed that he had made up his mind. Hearing Edward Anderson's words, Zhang Hai smiled bitterly. This is really bad luck. What kind of calamity was this? Boss, look over there. Just as Zhang Hai was about to say something to Edward Anderson, his subordinate Bill Zephaniah suddenly shouted loudly. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also looked in the direction he pointed. At this time, on the sea surface in the distance, a huge flesh-white object was floating towards Zhang Hai's sea area. Looking at the huge guy, perhaps others did not know what it was, but Zhang Hai was very clear. Roger. Looking at that guy, Zhang Hai was still wondering why he hadn't seen the giant spear squid even though the battle had already started. Now it seems that this guy was running too slowly. Indeed, creatures like squid only relied on the kinetic energy generated by absorbing water and then spitting it out to move forward. The small ones looked more difficult to catch, but their speed was indeed far inferior to that of fish. It's up to you, Roger. Seeing this guy join the battle, although Zhang Hai was still not sure whether the arrival of this guy would reverse the situation, at least this was a hope. Holding down Edward Anderson's gun, Zhang Hai decided to take a gamble. When the killer whales over there saw the giant squid, they were also stunned because they rarely saw this kind of creature. Giant squid, the scientific name of the king squid, but it was not a king squid, it was a little bigger than a king squid. But for the killer whales, they had seen this kind of creature before, but it was not very common because the giant squid lived in the deep sea of about 2,000 meters, and they lived in the ocean of about 300 meters. Occasionally they would see some of these creatures, but for this kind of creature, they did not seem to be a threat. Although the giant squid was very big, in fact, this kind of creature weighed less than a ton, and its lethality was very average. Its only ability was to block the vent of the whale and suffocate the whale. Killer whales usually would not catch this kind of creature because it was not delicious and troublesome. This thing was the favorite of sperm whales. Of course, the giant squid would not trouble the killer whales. Basically, the two could be regarded as well water not interfering with the river water, but at this time, this guy rushed straight over, which had already shown its identity. It was a guardian, and looking at its size, it seemed to be bigger than the ones they had seen before. Squeak! Seeing this guy, the leader screamed twice, so two killer whales rushed over to catch up with this guy. If it did not leave, then they did not mind getting rid of this guy, but just as they rushed over, this guy made a move first. Originally, the wrists of this giant squid were almost as thick as a person's wrist. Of course, this referred to the tip, the root was even thicker, and with the nourishment of Zhang Hai's spiritual energy, it was clear that this guy had also mutated. At this time, Zhang Hai's Roger, if measured in net, was about 30 meters, which was definitely not inferior to the blue whale. It was even bigger than the boat Zhang Hai was now on. The wrists that were originally as thick as a person's wrist, under the nourishment of spiritual energy and these days, were as thick as the wrists of 4 adult men. Seeing the two killer whales rushing over, 2 of its 8 wrists shot out in an instant, like big sticks, directly hitting the 2 killer whales. The 2 killer whales were stunned, and there was almost no room for them to react. They were directly hit by these 2 wrists. One must know that on these wrists, there were barb-like teeth. When these wrists came down, they instantly opened several deep wounds on the 2 killer whales. Blood flowed out in an instant, but it also aroused the anger of the 2 killer whales, and they opened their mouths to bite. But at this time, Roger originally shot out 2 wrists and circled around, directly pulling the tails of the 2 killer whales from behind. Then, without saying a word, it directly pulled the 2 guys into the deep sea. The killer whale panicked at that time. They wanted to struggle, but unfortunately, the giant spear squid, which was very light and easy to deal with in their eyes, had an incomparably powerful force at this time. It pulled their tails and sank directly into the deep sea. No matter how these 2 guys wanted to get rid of it, it was useless and they could only gradually be swallowed up by the darkness. Looking at the 2 killer whales disappearing like this, the other killer whales were stunned. You must know that so far, they have only lost 2 killer whales and victory is already in their hands. But now a giant spear squid has come and they have lost 2 more. What the hell is going on? What's going on? Now these killer whales were completely stunned. For a moment, the scene was quiet for a moment. But even if they were stunned, Zhang Hai's men would not be stunned. Big Fool took advantage of this opportunity to directly rush out of the encirclement and once again seriously injured a killer whale. He joined the dolphins and fought against these killer whales. Seeing this scene, these killer whales were ready to use the method just now to encircle these guys again. Now they still had enough whales. But at this time, suddenly, two sad cries sounded, and then the bodies of the two killer whales slowly floated up from the deep sea. There were no other wounds on these two killer whales except for the initial injuries, but they died just like that. They died very simply. This time, the killer whales panicked again. Killer whales were different from baleen whales, sperm whales, humpback whales, and other whales. They did not dive very deep. In very deep places, the water pressure was high, and they had to float up immediately, but unfortunately, Roger would not let them float down. He kept pulling down, and kept pulling down. These two guys were finished. Although they did not seem to have any injuries on the surface, their lungs had been crushed by the water pressure, and they could not be more dead. With the bodies of these two killer whales, Zhang Hai's Roger floated up to the surface again. Looking at its huge eyes, all the killer whales were a little weak. What a joke! It killed two adult killer whales so easily. When did the giant squid become so fierce? The smarter the guy, the more afraid of death, and these killer whales were the same. Speaking of which, killer whales did not lack food in the ocean because they could hunt more than 90% of the species in the ocean. They could eat fish, even sharks, dolphins, penguins, seabirds, seals, sea lions, and even walruses. They often hunted the cubs of sperm whales, humpback whales, and blue whales. The hunting success rate was as high as 50%. The reason why they came here was not because they were hungry and would die if they did not eat. They felt that there was delicious food here, so they came over. So now they were scared. Chapter 969. Now the situation of these killer whales was like a person who was a little hungry, but his family had already finished cooking. But when he passed by a house, he found that the food cooked by this family was very fragrant and looked particularly delicious. Most people's choice was to hurry home to eat, and these killer whales' choice was to rush into the house and drive the owner away so that they could eat. But now they found that the owner of the house had a gun on his waist, so they had to be scared. But even though they were scared, Zhang Hai's men were not scared. Seeing that these killer whales were not moving, and Roger had also come up, Big Fool rushed to these guys with the dolphins. Most of the killer whales saw these guys rushing over, and the first thing they wanted to do was run, but at the critical moment, the leader began to shout again. Hearing their leader's cry, these killer whales hesitated a little, but they didn't know if it was because of Roger's wisdom that he could see that these killer whales had a leader, or if he was just a blind cat bumping into a dead mouse. When he attacked again, he directly grabbed the tails of 3 killer whales, and one of them was the leader's. Squeak, squeak, squeak. In the constant screams of the leader, Roger spat out the water in his stomach and quickly sank into the deep sea. Seeing that their leader was finished, these killer whales also fully demonstrated the principle of dying friends. They turned their heads and quickly rushed in the direction they came from. Seeing these guys escape, Zhang Hai couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief and smile softly. But thinking of the dolphins sacrificed, Zhang Hai was a little sad. To be honest, this was the first time Zhang Hai's navy was hurt, and the first time they were hurt, a dolphin died, which also made him see that the security of his fishery was still not good enough. If it was a shark, then the dolphin would not be a problem, but now it was a whale, and the dolphin would be a little weak. Now it was still a killer whale. What if it was a sperm whale that came one day? What about Zhang Hai? He had to think about these things carefully. After their leader was taken away, the killer whales quickly retreated. Soon, the bodies of the 3 killer whales also floated to the sea level, and then slowly sank to the bottom of the sea. They all died because their lungs were crushed by the water pressure, so they would not float on the sea for long before sinking. At this time, a large number of fish had gathered beside the bodies of these whales. For the fish in Zhang Hai's manner, this was an out-and-out feast. Sometimes nature was so ironic. The hunter in the previous second would become the prey of his prey in the next second. However, Big Dumb and the others didn't take a share of the spoils. The death of a dolphin made them very sad. Many dolphins even floated to the surface of the water and began to mourn. It was as if they were sending off the dead dolphin. Seeing this scene, Zhang Hai couldn't do anything but sigh. He turned and walked into the cabin and took out a piece of beef that was frozen in the refrigerator. What he could do now was to replenish these guys' lost physical strength and recover from their injuries. Yes, although it seemed that Zhang Hai's Marines didn't suffer any injuries, but some injuries were inevitable. Big Dumb had 7 or 8 wounds on his body. Although the wounds weren't deep, they were still bleeding. In this piece of beef, Zhang Hai injected 4 auras into it. This was also his rare generosity. Then he cut the beef with aura into more than a dozen pieces and took them out. Big Dumb, his wife, and each dolphin were given a piece. At the same time, the biggest piece was given to Roger. If it weren't for him today, Zhang Hai's manner would be miserable. I don't want to hear about today's matter under any circumstances. Looking at these guys sinking to the bottom of the sea again after feeding them the beef, Zhang Hai also said to the fishermen behind him. Now, including Edward Anderson, they couldn't understand why those dolphins, sharks, and the giant squid would help Zhang Hai. They really couldn't understand. But even if they couldn't understand, it doesn't mean that they have to talk about these things. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, they naturally nodded. After all, they don't want to lose their jobs in Zhang Hai's manner, including those newcomers. They clearly saw how much money Edward Anderson made last year. It's impossible for them not to be envious. Especially now that they know that Zhang Hai is about to buy another batch of economic fish, they won't leave even if he drives them away. After this matter subsided, Edward Anderson restarted the engine and headed in the direction of the dock. But on the way back, everyone was silent, especially Zhang Hai, who has been sitting on the bow, looking at the wind and waves in front of him. He didn't care about the water droplets splashing on his body. He just sat there with his chin in his hand. He was really in a bad mood. After returning home, he wasn't in the mood to play with Qi Jie and the others. After briefly telling them about the situation at the fishery, these girls also knew that it wasn't the time to play. They obediently washed up and returned to the manor. In the evening, Zhang Hai didn't do any exercise. Instead, he directly hugged Feng Yunchen, Ai Xiaoxi, Sheila, and Ashiria, who should be on shift tonight, and went to sleep. Soon, the 4 girls fell asleep. Zhang Hai kept looking at the ceiling, thinking about how to increase the combat effectiveness of his side. In Zhang Hai's hometown, there has been a saying that only a dog can kill a dog. Of course, that's what that saying means. What he has to do now is to strengthen the defense of his own sea, and to deal with marine giants such as killer whales, sperm whales, and humpback whales. Zhang Hai's first thought was killer whales, but this idea just emerged and was thrown out by Zhang Hai. It's not because he killed a lot of killer whales today. He is not so narrow-minded. It's because after he came back, he specifically checked this kind of creature. This kind of creature can eat too much. An adult killer whale, weighing 9 tons, eats at least 4% of its own weight in food a day, or even more. 4% of 9 tons is 360 kilograms. Zhang Hai calculated that half of this 360 kilograms belongs to his own fishery, which is 180 kilograms of fish. Based on Zhang Hai's $50 per kilogram of fish, raising a killer whale, even if he let it eat half of its food a day and come back to eat the other half, it will cost him $9,000. If it eats all in Zhang Hai's territory, it will cost him $18,000. Of course, it is impossible to raise 1 killer whale. The food cost of 10 per day is $180,000, which is $7 million a year. Zhang Hai is actually a prodigal. Even if he is a prodigal, it is absolutely impossible for him to spend more than $60 million to raise so many killer whales, not to mention that they may not only eat $50. And with the nourishment of spiritual energy, they will not only weigh 9 tons. So after thinking for a long time, Zhang Hai felt that he would go bankrupt if he raised 10 killer whales, so he directly threw the idea to the back of his mind. Since there is no way to raise killer whales, he will have to raise something else. In addition to the killer whale, the second animal Zhang Hai thought of was the great white shark. Compared with the killer whale, the great white shark is smaller and much lighter. Its combat power is not much worse, but it is too stupid, so it naturally eats much less. The great white shark is different from ordinary sharks. Ordinary sharks, such as Big Fool, are cold-blooded fish. The great white shark is not a completely cold-blooded fish. It is a semi-homeothermal animal, so although it is not like Big Fool, which can eat a full meal for 2 months, it often eats a meal for half a month. Even if it eats all day, the amount of food it eats is about 1/6% of its own weight. An adult great white shark is about 3,200 kilograms. According to 3 tons, the amount of food it eats a day is only 48 kilograms. All of the fish it preys on Zhonghai will cost $2,400 a day and $876,000 a year. If it raises 10, it will cost about $9 million. Compared with $65.7 million a year, this is less than 1/6. It is still within Zhonghai's acceptable range, but there is one point. First, this thing is not so easy to deal with and is more dangerous. Second, because this creature itself is not smart, it takes a long time to raise, but this is also a way. Thinking of the great white shark, he thought of cold-blooded animals. Thinking of cold-blooded animals, Zhonghai thought of his giant spear squid and sea serpent, but the sea serpent gave up after thinking about it. Zhonghai will not put this kind of thing in his sea area. Although this kind of thing is not aggressive, and it doesn't eat much, it can grow very big with Zhonghai's aura, but there is a problem. What if the fishermen bring these things up and they are bitten? Everything is based on people, so Zhonghai will not raise sea serpents. Now it seems that the best way should not be the giant spear squid and the great white shark. With a plan in mind, Zhonghai's eyes narrowed. Now what he has to figure out is where to get these things. He knows the sea area in his home, so there should be no such thing. But Zhonghai is not worried about the specific place, because don't forget, although he doesn't know, it is impossible for the old fisherman like Edward Anderson to not know. He will ask them tomorrow. There is probably no place that Edward Anderson doesn't know. Of course, Zhonghai refers to the sea, not the land. After putting down his thoughts, Zhonghai also fell asleep. Not long after, he also fell asleep. The busy day is over. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.